Member mic check, member mic check, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Sounds like it's on. Member mic check, 1, 2, 3. Test, 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 testing, 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 sitting back normally. Sitting back at a normal distance. Test, 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 1, 2, 3. Test, 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 test. Witness mic check, 1, 2, 3. Test, test, test. Look, now we got it. Look. I'm sorry, it must be my fault. Witness mic, 1, 2, 3. Test, test, test. Testing, 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 1, 2, 3. Test, 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 1, 2, 3. Look over at me. Am I getting test, 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 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3? Because the second time I put it in, we did. So maybe it wasn't that I had it in right. It's just there's a problem with that hook. Here's one over here, Wendy. There's one here. You want to move over there and try it? Probably I had it in right the first time. But first of all, let's make but it probably wasn't that I didn't have it pushed in. There's a short or something wrong with it. Because the second time I snapped it in, right, and it worked. So obviously it's not us. It was, I mean, I thought it was me, but I don't think it was now. I take that back. I know, but we've had Shanetta's work perfectly fine one day, and the next day did not work. So you can't just go by that. Here. Looks good so far. Oh, this one might help if I turn the mic on. Yeah. 30 or so? 30 or 40, don't go over about 30. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3, test, 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 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Test, test, test. Member Mike, 1, 2, 3, testing, testing. Member mic check, 1, 2, 3, testing, testing, testing. Testing, 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 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, testing.
The Subcommittee on Railroads, Pipelines, and Hazardous Material will come to order. I ask unanimous consent that the chairman be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. And as a reminder, if members wish to insert a document into the record, email me. I now recognize myself for the purposes of an opening statement for 5 minutes. Today's hearing examines the current and future state of Amtrak. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IJA, gave historic funding to railroads, with a large portion of that money going to Amtrak. Amtrak is a federally chartered corporation with the federal government as the majority stakeholder. Its board of directors is appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. Amtrak's funding largely comes from the federal government versus from ticket revenue. Without significant taxpayer support, we all know that Amtrak could not operate. Since its creation in 1971, Amtrak has never made a profit. Since 1971, Amtrak has never made a profit. Despite the funding provided in IJA, Amtrak predicts it will lose roughly $1 billion with a B per year, with those losses largely covered by the taxpayers. My Democrat colleagues like to note that highways and airlines also rely on government subsidies to operate. While those modes receive federal support, they are also essential forms of transportation and high use and high demand by the American people. Unlike Amtrak, Americans could not travel and function as they do without the use of highways and airplanes. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, Amtrak ridership and revenues plummeted as commuters stayed home or chose to use other modes of transportation. Ultimately, Amtrak received billions of extra dollars in COVID relief to operate largely empty trains for several months. And today, we will examine the state of Amtrak's post-COVID recovery. While Amtrak has regained some ridership in recent months, we will hear about Amtrak's plans to continue boasting demand and ticket revenue. Amtrak's losses arise mostly entirely from its national network and long-distance routes. Rather than focusing on attracting riders to existing routes, Amtrak now seeks to expand this network, risking a greater expense to the taxpayer. Some of these new routes will even require the states to cover costs and losses. And in fairness to Amtrak, prior to the pandemic, it was on a path to achieve profitability for the first time in roughly 50 years. This turnaround came as a result of tough decisions by its leaders that prioritized service and shared sacrifices with Amtrak employees. While growth is a positive trend for a company, Amtrak must prioritize improving its current network, including important system maintenance and upgrades, and improving safety, security, and customer satisfaction issues that have plagued Amtrak for years over expansion ambitions. In addition to spending and revenue issues, this committee has questioned Amtrak about its compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act, rising crime in its stations and trains, the potential transport of illegal immigrants from the southern border on its trains, and generous executive bonuses despite losses and service problems. Amtrak must work to attract customers of revenue and operate as a reasonable steward of the taxpayers' dollars. It should ensure that its network is safe and secure. Further, it is necessary for Amtrak to strengthen its relationship with the states, including through the development of a transparent and fair cost allocation policy for state-supported Amtrak routes. Finally, any potential expansion of Amtrak's system must allow for freight railroads to provide input on capacity and track sharing issues. The recent supply chain crisis further emphasizes the value of freight railroads in efficiency moving goods across the nation. Amtrak's passenger expansion efforts should not be allowed to obstruct the critical movement of freight railroads. I now recognize Ranking Member Payne for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to one of the major points that you made, if there is an example of a passenger entity somewhere in the world that is profitable on its own, please, the committee would love to know. So with that, I want to thank you, Chairman Nels, Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Larson, and our two witnesses for being here today. We're here today during an exciting time for Amtrak and, more broadly, intercity passenger rail across the country. For the first time, this mode of transportation has guaranteed funding for multiple years. The value of the certainty is not to be understated. This is akin to the beginning of the interstate highway system, which we continue to support. The bipartisan infrastructure law signed by President Biden in November 2021 provides $22 billion in funding to Amtrak through fiscal year 2026, $16 billion of which is to be invested in the national network, while the remaining $6 billion goes towards infrastructure. And that is along the Northeast Corridor. Another $19 billion is authorized for Amtrak's capital investments nationwide. The bipartisan infrastructure further invests $36 billion in the federal-state partnership for intercity passenger rail programs, with $24 billion allocated explicitly to the Northeast Corridor. Another $7.5 billion in funding is also authorized for this grant program. Amtrak recently submitted grant applications for multiple projects through this program, totaling roughly $9 billion. Together, these projects will assist in increasing rail capacity while reducing service interruptions. Projects like the Gateway program in my home state of New Jersey will improve the passenger experience along the Northeast Corridor by digging a pair of new tunnels under the Hudson River and replacing the Portal Bridge. Both of these choke points are over 100 years old, and maintenance problems here often cause delays for passengers riding Amtrak and New Jersey Transit. Other projects along the Northeast Corridor, such as the Frederick Douglass Tunnel in Baltimore, need restoration. This tunnel is 150 years old, the oldest along the corridor. Water damage and tight curves force Acela trains to slow down to 30 miles an hour, adding precious minutes to trips for travelers across Maryland and the rest of the corridor. Similarly, there is much work to be done on intercity rail projects across the country, including bringing stations into compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act, refreshing Amtrak's fleet of aging rail cars and locomotives, and replacing older rail bridges like the 100-year-old San Luis Rey River Bridge in San Diego County, California. I look forward to new and improved corridors that can be advanced with this funding. The Federal Rail Administration recently received numerous proposals for the Corridor ID program. This will be the template for passenger rail expansion in the coming years. Established corridors in North Carolina and California will finally have a consistent federal partner. New corridors are ripe for development in Texas, Nevada, and the Gulf Coast. I look forward to the Federal Railroad Administration's project pipeline that will identify the capital projects needed to develop these and other corridors. All of this funding, all of these projects, and all of the benefits that future generations will enjoy would not be possible without our efforts in the 117th Congress when it passed the bipartisan infrastructure law in this chamber and sent it to President Biden for signature. The $100 billion in funding for rail projects included in this monumental law is a game changer for communities nationwide. I look forward to diving into some of the details with our witnesses shortly. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Payne yields. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Nels and Ranking Member Payne, for holding today's hearing on improving Amtrak operations across the country. The bipartisan infrastructure law was a monumental achievement that supercharged our nation's investment in rail with $100 billion in funding. The BIL provided bold long-term investments across transportation systems and infrastructure that are creating jobs and benefiting our economy. Just last week, the Bureau of Labor Stats reported the economy added 339,000 jobs in May, including 25,000 construction jobs and 24,000 transportation and warehousing jobs, a sign that the economy is on the move. For intercity passenger rail specifically, the BIL guaranteed multi-year funding for state of good repair investments and development. It makes possible for the first time ever dedicated, reliable federal funding dispersed over the next few years to improve and expand intercity passenger rail. And just this week, the first round of competitive rail grant funding from BIL was announced, and among the recipients was the city of Burlington, Washington, in the great state of Washington, in the Fighting Second District, which is awarded a $2 million planning grant to remove a grade crossing, which will in turn increase mobility for all rail traffic. Burlington Mayor Steve Sexton brought this idea to me nearly a decade ago, and I'm pleased to see this project awarded the funding it needs to improve safety and reduce congestion. Projects like this are improving the quality of life and creating jobs, and Washington State has led the way in executing BIL funding so far. And I expect great results for our communities that will come from this grant and the additional rail funding to come as well. Amtrak and the FRA can now enact long-term plans for passenger rail expansion and improvement, secure in the knowledge that funding will be there in future years. The bipartisan budget agreement protected BIL funding from cuts, including this vital rail funding, and demonstrated support on both sides of the aisle to maintain these investments. I look forward to hearing from both of our witnesses today about the difference this budget certainty has made for them in developing and sustaining programs, and how this will ultimately improve service for rail passengers. I want to apologize for Mr. Warren for missing our meeting yesterday. It was an airplane issue and not a rail issue that prevented me from getting here on time. So, however, this funding is not only intended to improve rail service, but to expand it. The demand for more frequent, more reliable passenger service is real. Cities and counties across the nation want increased access to the national passenger rail network. They know this will help their towns grow and thrive and provide a greener way to move people. The communities that have rail service want better service. The communities that do not have service want service to start. Communities in my district were frustrated that the COVID pandemic shuttered state-supported Amtrak routes like the Amtrak Cascades, which connects communities like Everett, Edmonds, Stanwood, Mount Vernon, and Bellingham in my district to cities like Seattle, Spokane, Portland, Eugene, and Vancouver, British Columbia. I celebrate the return of this service and note, though, that it took 3 years to restore. Mr. Payne referred to the Gulf Coast, where it took 17 years to get an agreement there to restart service after Hurricane Katrina. To my colleagues on this committee representing Gulf communities, I share the frustration you and your constituents have undoubtedly experienced. As we did in fighting for rail funding in the BIL, this committee is committed to helping communities get regular and reliable passenger rail service. Now, of the $100 billion provided for rail in the BIL, $66 billion was provided in the form of advanced appropriations. The remaining $34 billion is subject to future appropriations. So I think we should continue to push for Congress to fully fund its intercity passenger rail commitments to create more jobs, grow regional economies, reduce congestion and carbon emissions, and build a cleaner, greener, safer, and more accessible transportation network. The BIL is also an investment in the workforce. This funding will be used to grow a well-trained, diverse workforce to build, operate, and maintain a national intercity passenger rail network. The transformational investment in the BIL is a great start, but Congress needs to build on this by securing a reliable funding stream for intercity passenger rail. Highways, transit, airports, and harbors all have access to trust funds, enabling them to fund their long-term major capital projects without having to wait for annual appropriations process. It's past time to do this for rail. And this committee will have the opportunity today to hear from two witnesses who are on the front lines, turning these historic investments into tangible improvements to rail service that our communities can rely on. We'll also have the opportunity to specifically examine Amtrak's plans for service improvements and growth, and to hear from one of Amtrak's key partners, the Northeast Corridor Commission, on how BIL will improve passenger rail in that region. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about their vision for the future of passenger rail. And with that, yield back.
Mr. Larson yields. I would like to now welcome our witnesses and thank you for being here. Mr. Gardner, Mr. Warner, take a minute here to explain our lighting system to you. There are 3 lights. Green means go, obviously. Yellow, you're running out of time, and then red means pump the brakes. I ask unanimous consent that the witness full statements be included into the record without objection so ordered. And as your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee asks that you limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes. And with that, Mr. Gardner, you're recognized for those 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Nels, Ranking Member Payne, Ranking Member Larson, and members of the subcommittee. Thanks for having me here today. Let me start with a brief update on the strong year Amtrak is having so far in FY23. Safety is our #1 priority, and its importance was highlighted this past weekend by the tragic accident in India. Our heart goes out to those impacted, and it's a solemn reminder that our work is never done. I'm glad to report, however, that through March, Amtrak's rate of reportable injuries was 20% better than our annual goal, and we've not had a single NTSB investigated accident this year. I'm also proud to say that we've returned service to all of our network. While several routes are still with less frequency than pre-pandemic, we're progressing our plan to add more service over the coming year. We also continue to upgrade our customer experience, improve our facilities, and enhance our food and beverage offerings. Through April, our year-to-date ridership was 84% of our pre-pandemic levels, and in April, it was 89%. By next year, we expect to reach our overall FY19 level of 32 million riders again. This is remarkable and the best post-pandemic performance of any U.S. passenger rail operator. However, ridership does remain impacted by some insufficient equipment and reduced business travel. Both have affected Acela revenues in particular, making adequate funding for the Northeast Corridor even more vital. Speaking of financials, through April of FY23, our adjusted operating loss was $434 million, which is $53 million better than our plan. And our fare box recovery has risen to 76%. We're still a ways off from achieving break-even results, as we were on track to do in FY 2020, due to the more than 3 years of significant cost increases and lost revenue growth. But we see a path for our train operations business to return there under an apples-to-apples comparison in about 5 years. Let me also mention how the finances of the company have changed dramatically due to the large influx in IIJA capital funding. Amtrak is no longer simply a passenger rail operator, but we're now a major construction company executing a massive capital program. This creates additional operating expenses that didn't exist before. Regarding economics, Congress was clear in the IIJA that Amtrak's statutory goal is to maximize public benefits from federal funding, not just minimize our need for them. You can be sure we'll continue to place a balance on pursuit of improved financial performance with our other statutory goals. Through the IIJA, for the first time in Amtrak's history, Congress and the administration are now investing at the levels needed to achieve these goals. Since I last appeared before the subcommittee, Amtrak has begun to receive our IIJA funds from the FRA and put them to good use. With our partners, we've recently applied for about $10 billion in FRA and DOT grants, and we're advancing many key projects, including construction of the new Hudson River Tunnel and rehab of our East River tunnels, both which will begin next year, and construction of Portal North Bridge in New Jersey, which is about 25% complete. Advancing our BMP tunnel replacement program and vital bridge projects in Maryland and Connecticut. Manufacturing our new Aero train sets by Siemens in Sacramento, California, and our new Acela trains by Alstom in upstate New York, with support from hundreds of suppliers all across America. Procurement of our new fleet of long-distance trains, which we will put out to bid later this year. Completion of 112 ADA projects in stations all across our network over the next 16 months. Startup of 2 new state-supported services between New Orleans and Mobile and the Twin Cities and Chicago later this year. Grant applications to study extensions for long-distance service between Meridian, Mississippi and Dallas-Fort Worth, and daily service on the Cardinal and Sunset routes. And support for many of the more than 90 applications by states and cities from across America to the FRA's Corridor ID program to develop new and enhanced services. We're excited by this progress, and it's important to note, though, that it will take sustained federal support to develop a 21st century passenger rail network. In the near term, we need adequate appropriations to maintain and operate our trains. In the long term, we need a reliable funding mechanism like other transportation modes have so we can efficiently plan and deliver our network. Lastly, good on-time performance is fundamental to our business, and we continue to face challenges with some of our host railroad partners. I hope this subcommittee will work with us on these issues so we can better serve the whole nation and your constituents. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today and for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. Mr. Warner, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Nels, Ranking Member Payne, Ranking Member Larson. I am Mitch Warren, Executive Director of the Northeast Corridor Commission. The commission was created by Congress to improve the corridor through better coordination among Amtrak, states, commuter rail operators, and the federal government. Thank you for inviting me to discuss our work in the renewal of America's oldest and busiest passenger rail system. The Northeast Corridor brings hundreds of thousands of intercity and commuter passengers to work, business meetings, family visits, and leisure activities every day. However, these riders rely on infrastructure with tens of billions of dollars in state of good repair needs, including 15 major bridges and tunnels that are over 100 years old and in need of replacement. Given these historic challenges, I cannot overstate what an exciting time this is for the Northeast Corridor. After decades of underinvestment, the NEC finally has the down payment it needs to rebuild infrastructure that dates back to the period between the Civil War and World War II. Thanks to the work of Congress and the Biden administration on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the NEC has its first ever source of dedicated multi-year funding, providing exactly the kind of predictability needed to efficiently deliver a major capital program. The Commission's decade-long efforts to build a foundation of trust, transparency, collaboration, and accountability have put our members in position to invest this historic funding. The Commission's 18 voting members represent US DOT, Amtrak, Northeast states, and the District of Columbia. The Commission was authorized in recognition of the complexities of a corridor that has multiple right-of-way owners and rail operators, and which supports over 2,000 trains a day, including high-speed Acela trains, Northeast regional and long-distance trains, commuter trains, and freight trains. In 2021, the Commission approved Connect NEC 2035, a collaborative effort to define the corridor's state of good repair and improvement needs, and stage and sequence those infrastructure investments over 15 years. Connect NEC, which will be updated every 2 years, is the plan to rebuild and grow the corridor. Thanks to the funding provided through the bipartisan infrastructure law, these critical projects suddenly have a path forward, promising more reliable, more frequent, and faster service for the workers, travelers, and businesses that depend on the corridor. The Commission is now looking at the challenges our members face in delivering these critical projects. To this end, we are developing an implementation coordination program that will bring to project delivery the same kind of transparency, collaboration, and accountability that the Commission has brought to cost sharing and planning. This program will focus on improving the interagency coordination needed among our members as they partner to deliver projects. The ICP will track project progress and provide an early warning system when projects threaten to go off schedule due to coordination issues. The challenges in front of us are formidable, but success is critical to the region's vitality and growth. Essential to this success is what it took to build the interstate highway system and what the BIL delivered for passenger rail. A dedicated multi-year funding source providing the predictability needed to efficiently deliver a major capital program. In fact, even more funding is necessary over the longer term to address all of the corridor's state of good repair and improvement needs. The Federal Railroad Administration's NEC project inventory includes projects that total over $100 billion. Notwithstanding these significant future funding needs, the bipartisan infrastructure law is a game changer for the corridor. After decades of falling further behind when it comes to replacing aging infrastructure, a brighter future lies ahead. We thank Congress and President Biden for this historic investment that will benefit travelers for generations to come. The Commission's members are eager to deliver these critical rail projects that would generate meaningful economic, transportation, and environmental benefits to the region and to the nation. Thank you for inviting me to speak today on behalf of the Commission. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. I now ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the following letters from the Association of American Railroads and the Coalition for the Northeast Corridor, as well as a letter from the Rail Passengers Association CEO. Without objection, so ordered. I'd like to thank you all. Thank you both for your testimony. We'll now turn to questions from the panel, and I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. I appreciate you, Mr. Gardner. It's good to see you. I see you got the chief behind you there. Thank you for coming. I want to bring to your attention, I'm sure you're familiar with the Office of the Inspector General, this report that talked a little bit about safety and security. Amtrak has opportunities to strengthen controls over high security keys. Both you gentlemen familiar with this report?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Warner, familiar with the report?
I have not had a chance to read it yet.
Okay, Mr. Gardner's familiar with the report. You know, and I'm trying to read this, and there's so many redactions. I'm trying to put this puzzle together, but they obviously redacted so much here, obviously some type of a safety or security concern. Can you assure the members of this committee that Amtrak is doing everything it possibly can with the employees that are authorized to have a key, or employees that are no longer working, either resigned or terminated, that they don't keep their keys to some of these high-risk security areas? What are you doing to make sure that we can protect Amtrak?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, absolutely. We have, as a result of the good work of the Inspector General, we've revamping our key control process. I can tell you for a long time, these kind of switch keys have been around in sort of collectors' hands, and when I was on the freight railroad side as a switchman, had access to many of them. Those days are over now. We are controlling these tightly, and we appreciate the OIG's work there.
Well, I think it's obviously it's very damaging in my humble opinion. I think the gentleman sitting behind you, between you two, maybe will be able to help you with that, trying to get some of these keys back to individuals that no longer should have them. And I believe there was a report out there that some knucklehead or former employee was selling these things, putting them on the internet. It could become a big, big problem for all of us. How much, Mr. Gardner, how much money will Amtrak receive through IJA over the next 5 years? How much money?
Mr. Chairman, it's $22 billion is the advance appropriation funding to Amtrak directly. The other portion of transportation.
$22 billion. That's a lot of money.
Absolutely,
All right.
Mr. Chairman.
I want to spend just a moment here and talk a little bit about CRISI and CRISI grants. With the enormous amount of money that Amtrak is getting from the American taxpayers, I'm suggesting that Amtrak should not be allowed any more CRISI grant funding over the next 5 years while you are receiving tens of billions of dollars over the next 5 years. I mean, when you look at the CRISI grants, I think in 2022 is about $1.4 billion. For those of you that don't know what CRISI stands for, it's Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvements Program. And by hearing the testimony from the minority and hearing testimony, you're getting billions of dollars to help with your infrastructure, your improvements. And CRISI grant funding, in my humble opinion, should be set aside for the Class 2s and the Class 3s. So I am just letting you know that it would be my intent, while you are receiving billions and billions of taxpayers' dollars over the next 5 years, that Amtrak should not be allowed to participate in the CRISI grant program. You stated that security in 2023, and I appreciate the fact, 84% ridership. I think you're going to get to 89, and eventually, maybe by the end of the year, you'll get to the 2019 levels, which would be 30-something million passengers?
Next year, we will achieve 32 million riders.
Fantastic. I think that's great. And I think while you did state that security or safety is your number one priority, I can certainly appreciate that. Mr. Warner, I've had the chief in my office before. We were talking a little bit about safety and on traveling on a train. I mean, I was an old lawman for several years, understand a little bit about safety and security. And I was always puzzled by the fact that I can jump on that train outside at Washington, D.C. here. I can go up and buy a ticket. I don't have to provide any ID. I can pay for cash. You can take that ticket, give it to the guy, and he could give it to someone else. There's no matching bags or anything. You can just carry a couple suitcases on a train, right? You don't have any detectors or anything to go through to get on that train. How is Amtrak, what are you doing to make sure that you don't get some individual that has bad intentions, someone carrying a firearm, from getting on a train when I mean, I can't get on an airplane with a bottle of water. I can't get on an airplane, even having a glass of water. But it appears to me that to get on an Amtrak train, you don't have to have any ID, your bags don't have to match the manifest, they're not inspected, you got puppies out there sniffing, I support all that, but what are you doing in the rural areas to make sure that you can keep those passengers as safe as possible?
Certainly for each of our individual railroads, safety and security are the foundation of everything. You can't have riders if you're not promising and guaranteeing their safety and security. As a commission, we focused on the infrastructure, so it's an issue more for our individual members than we have addressed as a commission. When we were created, there's actually a separate safety committee that was created separate from us that was to look at those issues, and we were to focus on the infrastructure, cost sharing, and coordinated planning. So those are critical issues for our members and our riders, but as a commission itself is not something that we have addressed directly.
Well, I find it kind of disturbing in many ways that, you know, this is public transportation, billions of dollars going to it. Obviously, we had tragedies on 9/11 with an aircraft, right? And look at what we did. We created a whole new organization and put billions of dollars into it still today to make sure that the people traveling on airplanes across the country are safe. And then you look at Amtrak's operations. And I know the chief behind you, he's eyeballing me right now. He's thinking I'm doing everything I can, but you have billions of dollars now. I think you need to try to not convince me, but show me that safety, Mr. Gardner, is an actual priority, that you're doing everything you possibly can. I'm going to finish it up with this, and that is, I read some stuff here about the board meetings. You know, you have these board meetings. I don't think those board meetings are open to the public. I don't think they're part of the public record. I think transparency is so important, and bonuses. Mr. Gardner, would you care to share with me what your salary is every year? What is your salary, your annual salary?
The annual salary is a matter of record. We have disclosed it. It's currently, for my position, it's a little bit less than $500,000 a year.
$500,000. And I appreciate you just willing to share that. I think the American people have a right to know. It's the taxpayers paying you. I'll tell you what mine is, $174, just with everybody else up here too. I could tell you every salary of every person serving in the United States military. I mean, it's pretty much public record. So it's an annual salary of $500,000. And so when you have these meetings and they're not access, you know, they're not open to the public when it talks about bonuses. Did you receive a bonus last year? Did you take a bonus?
For fiscal year 22, yes.
Well, can I ask you how much that bonus was?
I'd have to get you the specifics numbers, but it's a portion of the salary based on the company's performance. So
Okay.
as I'm sure you know, the Congress has passed a law encouraging us to develop a pay-for-performance system. The Inspector General recommended, the GAO recommended one. We use this in order to entice great employees to the company and retain them. The salaries that we provide at Amtrak are pale in comparison to our freight railroad counterparts, from which many of our employees come. It's essential that we have the best employees to be doing the public's work. And delivering on this incredible investment plan. We use this as a retention tool, and it's very consistent with private sector business everywhere.
I appreciate that. I just think, Mr. Gardner, I think when it's taxpayers' money, I think transparency is so important. There should be transparent, and there should be no reason why you wouldn't be willing to share with, and you did share your salary, but the bonus, whether it's 25% or 50%, I think the American taxpayer has a right to know what they're paying their leaders with Amtrak. With that, sir, I will now yield 5 minutes to Ranking Member Larson for his questions. Oh, wait. Oh, Mr. Payne, I'm sorry. Mr. Payne.
Thank you.
I'll give it to him.
You know, in reference to the question asked of Mr. Gardner in terms of his salary and bonuses, I think it pales in comparison to the freight rails compensation on the other side, which is not open to the public. So we know that their compensation over the past several years has been in the millions. So I think we thank you, Mr. Gardner, for working at a bargain basement salary. And Mr. Gardner, while some parts of the country are slowly recovering from COVID in the inner-city rail ridership, others have almost fully recovered. An excellent example can be found in the ridership numbers and investments made in North Carolina and Virginia. Please tell us the state transportation agencies that are doing differently, what they're doing differently to drive an increase in the inner-city rail passengers, and what Amtrak is doing to assist these state transportation agencies in fulfilling these goals.
Thank you for the question, Ranking Member Payne. You're right. North Carolina and Virginia service is really exceptional, and I think the key is really three things. One, a sustained program of investment and leadership within the state. So the states have excellent rail departments that really focus on their programs in partnership with us and with their host railroads. And they've been willing to invest significantly. While I agree with the chairman that our focus has to be on improving the network we have and rebuilding our assets, and that's what the IIJ funds allows us to do, recapitalize our assets. What it doesn't allow us to do necessarily is focus on improvements in different areas, and that's why other funding is necessary. But the dollars here that are provided for the state in expansion are really coming from the state, and Virginia has invested over roughly $4 billion to upgrade the infrastructure between Washington and Richmond in partnership with CSX and with Amtrak. So that investment has been critical. Their leadership at the state level has been critical, and their focus on connecting markets and building station investments that support connectivity to rail. So there's a great new station in Raleigh, a new station coming in Charlotte, and a real focus on providing frequency. For instance, North Carolina is about to add a 4th Piedmont frequency. So creating enough utilities so that passengers have trains they can take at the right times of day, at the right trip time to connect to those markets. So we see Virginia through its service to the south in Roanoke, Newport News, Norfolk, and Richmond really exceeding their goals in terms of ridership growth coming back from the pandemic, and a great opportunity long-term to further connect the Northeast Corridor to the Southeast and really build a coastal connection of high-quality frequent service.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Warren, one of the many benefits of the rail service across the Northeast Corridor is getting cars off the roads and preventing additional air traffic in our already congested airspace. Can you please elaborate on how proposed infrastructure projects across the Northeast Corridor and the goal to reduce the state of good repair backlog will benefit the communities in the region economically, and how these impacts will impact the global fight against climate change?
Yeah, thank you. The transportation is the sector that emits the highest level of greenhouse gases. So the more we can do to attract riders to Northeast Corridor trains, most of which are electrified, the more we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Also has the added benefit of reducing automobile congestion. I just rode down much of the corridor from Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, through New York, New Jersey, Delaware this weekend, and you know, I sure wish more people, including myself, were taking the train for that trip. So a lot of the work we're doing to create more reliable service, more frequent service, faster service is going to bring more riders, and it's going to take riders from automobiles, take riders from airplanes, both of which emit significantly more greenhouse gas emissions, and also add to congestion on our roads, I-95 and other roads, and the aviation system. So the more we can implement our Connect NEC plan, bring more riders to the Amtrak and commuter trains on the corridor, the better off we'll be, both from a congestion perspective and a climate perspective.
Thank you. And, you know, the few times that I don't use Amtrak to come to work, I drive down and I have to leave between midnight and 4 in the morning in order to bypass all that traffic between New Jersey and Washington, D.C. So thank you for that. This question is for both of our witnesses. You know, I'll continue to work on a disadvantaged business enterprise requirement for the FRA funding, but in the meantime, could you share what efforts you're making to ensure contracts are going to help create a level playing field for small businesses owned and controlled by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals?
Ranking Member Payne, I'm pleased to report we've made a lot of progress on supplier diversity and DBEs. As you know, we've got a supplier diversity program, which includes minority and women-owned business enterprises, veterans and service-disabled veteran-owned businesses, disadvantaged business enterprises, small businesses, et cetera. And we set a goal of 15% of our contracting and procurement from these entities. And in fiscal year 22, we exceeded that goal, achieving 25%, roughly $484 million in spend with diverse suppliers. So we've been working really hard to do that. In 23 so far, we're at 27.8% of our spend through diverse suppliers. And we have a new upgraded supplier diversity office, which is doing 27 outreach events throughout this year, and a new small business resource center, because there are many small businesses of all types that are out there that have important capabilities to offer Amtrak and the rail industry, particularly as we're growing, and we're working hard to create a bigger supply base, both so we can get better quality, but also better pricing and ensure redundancy in terms of supply, because as we all saw during the pandemic, supply chain challenges certainly impacted us, and we want to make sure we have a robust base of potential suppliers. So this is a good business to invest in a diverse range of suppliers who can meet our needs from all across America and really allow us to succeed.
Thank you. Mr. Warren?
The commission doesn't do contracting. Our members contract with the major construction projects. They're the project managers. One related opportunity I might point out is just in workforce development. The workforce needs along the corridor are tremendous to try and invest these new funds, and we need to go out and find new workers, not the traditional workers we've always had. We have to go out and do more job training and do this in non-traditional places. So I think that's a major potential opportunity to diversify the workforce, expand the workforce. It creates jobs, it creates equitable jobs, and it helps us deliver significant projects that need to be delivered.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your consideration. I yield back.
Mr. Payne yields. I now recognize my colleague from the great state of Texas, Mr. Babin, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate you, Mr. Gardner, and Mr. Warren for being here today. The chairman, to follow up some of his line of questioning a while ago, is it legal to carry a firearm on, or any weapon on Amtrak by passengers?
No, Congressman. So we do not permit firearms on board, other than in a locked. You can transport your firearm. We carry it in a locked
Even
facility.
if you've got a permit for the states it's traveling through?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Even if you have a permit to carry it through the states you're traveling on?
That's right. Yeah, we
that
do
doesn't
not
make any
allow
difference.
firearms on board.
Okay. Well, passenger screening protections on Amtrak are nothing like on air travel, or even what the public must go through to enter into this very building here. The Brightline intercity passenger rail system in Florida has implemented screening technologies to help prevent persons from bringing dangerous weapons on its trains. It's not as comprehensive as the airport technology, but it's better than nothing. And if you're sitting there and someone has broken the law and has a weapon and you're totally defenseless, you're pretty much up the creek. So why hasn't Amtrak invested in similar screening technologies to protect the passengers of Amtrak?
Thank you for your question. So we take security very seriously, and we are using a multi-layered system to protect our passengers, and broadly have very good results. Incidents are quite rare on Amtrak, but I share your concern that as we continue, opportunities to increase security are really important. First, a couple of things that we do today already. We have random screening together with TSA. We have a large fleet of trained dogs for both explosives and other interdiction. We partner with DHS for our Viper teams to do inspection and response. Federal air marshals, we're in partnership with them to be able to be part of our security forces on our trains. We have increased our APD workforce, and we have put many more officers on trains in the field. We are looking at the kind of technology that you discussed and that Brightline is using, Smithsonian similarly, and many stadiums and others are using relatively unintrusive but potentially effective materials and methods to further screen. And as you mentioned, we have a big network, about 500 stations across America, some huge, handling hundreds of thousands of people, including commuter passengers, and some quite small, trying to think about how we can embed technology into our trains in addition at stations to increase security. One thing I'll note is that Amtrak receives relatively little funding from TSA, and TSA's own program has very relatively little. So for us to increase significantly in this, we do need and will need greater partnerships and support. But we are interested in this and taking it very seriously, because we agree we need to strengthen.
I certainly hope so, because if you're not allowing the private law-abiding citizen passengers to protect themselves, then you have to protect them and keep bad actors from bringing weapons aboard. Last Congress, the infrastructure law gave Amtrak a tremendous amount of funding. In addition to that, Amtrak may apply itself for other federal funding programs and grants, including CRISI grants that the chairman mentioned, and federal state partnerships. CRISI grants are well oversubscribed already, and countless more rail safety projects are in need of funding. There are already over 95 applications for the Fed state program, but only 30 or so will be funded. In Amtrak's annual and legislative report, you seek to get greater permission to use federal funds that you receive from the IIJA to serve as your matching contribution for these other grants. Do you feel that it is appropriate for other stakeholders, such as state and local governments or short-line railroads, to have to compete against Amtrak for these very limited funds?
Well, first, Congressman, let me say we certainly support the CRISI program. We support our Class 2 and Class 3 partners and the broad eligibility of CRISI. it's, I think, important to understand that the dollars that have come to Amtrak are for a very specific set of purposes. We can't use them for many of the activities that we might need to for improving the railroad. They're focused on really state-of-good repair, replacement activities for our fleet and our stations and our infrastructure. So those dollars aren't eligible for every activity. And the safety focus of CRISI is really unique. That's what we fundamentally seek to partner almost always with host railroads, states and localities, other carriers, to find opportunities for improvement. For instance, further investments in our positive train control system where the system's not required, but where we think it's appropriate. Track upgrades where with host railroads where the track is is falling below standards for Amtrak service. So these are things that we think are good uses of the dollars. They're not things we could use our funds from the IAJ to otherwise accomplish. And Amtrak's a relatively small portion of the total CRISI pot. Most of the dollars are going to freight railroads and for safety programs, and we support that.
I'm out of time. Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Babin yields. I now recognize Ranking Member Larson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Gardner, we had our last hearing on the topic in December 2021, just after the BIL had passed. One of the challenges raised was making sure there were enough people hired to implement the funding, both at FRA and at Amtrak. Can you update us on what your people plan looks like and where you are in achieving that?
Yes, sir, Ranking Member Larson. Appreciate the question.
Sir's fine.
Yeah, sir. We've had great results so far in our hiring efforts. As you say, we're really changing the whole scale of the company. And last year we hired about 3,700 people. Already this year we've hired 2,700 folks. By the end of the year, we'll have hired about 5,000 additional employees. Some of that's to fill attrition, the normal retirements and so forth, and some of it is to create more capacity. And those jobs are across America. We have a 46-state, 3-province network, and focused all across our different functions. So a significant portion of those are craft hires, folks who are out there running the trains, maintaining the infrastructure. But we've also really invested in our program management, design capacity, all of the really professionals that are out there to help us build new projects and update our infrastructure and procure this new fleet.
Are there areas during the pandemic where you lost people proportionally in a function and you're having to build that back up in particular?
Yes, notably our mechanical forces, and I'm glad to say we're well above now some of our levels that we had even pre-pandemic to create the capacity we need to maintain our equipment. And that's mostly driven by the fact that there's huge demand for skilled workers in this area, electricians, welders, machinists, massive demand, and being competitive has been hard for us in certain regions of the country. So we've really worked hard. We've also created a new apprenticeship program, and this is a program that is supported through grant funds with our various unions, and then rolling out across our mechanical facilities so that we can train folks and give them the capabilities they need to serve Amtrak, but also lifelong skills. So it's really been a good partnership.
So this BIL was a historic investment in passenger rail, but it really means a historic investment in hiring people in order to have passenger rail, it seems.
Absolutely. We're doing hiring that Amtrak would do in a year now that we would take half a decade to have done previously because of this new capacity we need to build. And it's a chance to build a whole new generation of rail workers. It's one of the most exciting things I think about this time is we're building a new generation of skilled employees who are here to contribute to the mission.
Mr. Warren, thanks. Mr. Warren, at the commission, you mentioned your focus on infrastructure. Do you have, even with your partners, do you have a similar set of issues in hiring people to make these projects work, to make these projects happen? I apologize.
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges to implementing all of these projects, spending the money from the infrastructure bill, is hiring workers. Every one of our members, and Stephen talked about the hiring they're doing, it's critical. And it's not easy. It's a tight labor market. But that hiring has to be done. It's creating a lot of good jobs, but it's essential if these projects are going to move forward. There's a lot of work that needs to be done on the corridor and nationwide, but our focus is certainly the corridor. and you got to have the workforce, both management and labor, to make it happen. And without the funding certainty of the infrastructure bill, Amtrak wouldn't be hiring as much as it is right now. The funding certainty is critical to giving our members the confidence to go out and hire and train, because everyone you hire, you're training sometimes for a year or more.
Yeah. The second point I wanted to make, and made in my opening statement, was that passengers and states want more rail service. And maybe Mr. Gardner, this is not for you to say how great Washington State and the Northwest is. We tend to be more ahead than other areas in the state-supported system. But who's in second place and who's in last generally? Like, what kind of work needs to take place in different areas of the country to get caught up on the state-supported systems?
Well, thank you, sir. We have generally restored frequencies to all of our routes across the United States, but you're right that we have a strong program in the Pacific Northwest. The Cascade Service and Washington State's leadership there has been tremendous. The goal later this fall will be to introduce 5th and 6th round trip, so to increase service still. And I know it was very important to you that we were able to go back to Vancouver and have 2 round trips there. And when you look at the current state-supported system, we've seen really a lot of enthusiasm from all over. And I think it's really important to note that this drive to grow and improve service is really state and community driven. Amtrak is their partner, but fundamentally this is the decision that states make to decide to expand or invest in service. Part of the big challenge for the current network.
You have to wrap up and go on for the record.
I say is that we have a lot of places that don't have passenger rail service today at the levels that exist, like in the Cascades, the Southeast, the Mountain West, and we see a lot of interest from communities there right now.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Larson yields. I now recognize Mr. Stauber for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Gardner, I want to talk about safety and security. Between 2019 and 2021, Amtrak Police Department received over 400,000 emergency calls annually. This is over double what APD received in previous years. What is the current size of the Amtrak police force?
Thank you for the question, sir. And our current workforce is about 406, 407 APD
Would you consider that fully staffed?
officers. Our goal to be fully staffed is 431, which we believe we'll achieve by the end of this fiscal year. We have a lot of folks in training, and as you know, it's a competitive environment to get qualified law enforcement folks, so we're working to achieve that.
You had mentioned, I'm very glad you said this in your opening statement, safety is the #1 priority at Amtrak. APD strategic plan suggests that you are, quote, restructuring and modernizing, end quote, training. What does that restructuring and modernized training look like?
Well, I think that the core of our strategy is to deploy our resources across our network where they can be most effective. So we're a very data-driven organization, and the chief who's behind me here leads our efforts to prioritize our response across the network, make sure we have the right assets in the right space, and then to create the right sort of modern training methods and the right force philosophy so that we can serve our communities well. That, of course, means right now more riders, more train rides.
Did you say force philosophy? Force?
Yeah,
what does that mean?
I mean our APD force, the
Okay.
policing philosophy and how we integrate with our partners. As you know, we're across the nation and we have to partner with local police forces plus the FBI and TSA and others. And that's a key to the way that we ensure security is by this relationship of partners across the network.
All right. And APD is a priority for Amtrak, correct?
APD is an absolute priority for Amtrak.
I want to get back to what Chairman Nels was talking about. Your salary is $500,000, and you received a bonus. And you said to keep good, in your words, great employees and retain them, you need bonuses. Did any members of the APD receive bonuses?
Our management workforce is part of our program.
Yes or no? Did
Yeah,
did
so-
the
so
Amtrak
the-
police force, did any Amtrak police force members on the line, did they receive bonuses equivalent to your percentage of a bonus?
Those management employees who are not agreement employees in the APD force did. The other employees are covered by a collective bargaining agreement, which we negotiate.
Did they receive bonuses?
Yep. No, not per their contract, yes.
And moments ago, you said that it's a high priority, and to give bonuses, you need, in order to keep great employees and retain them, bonuses were part of that. So it seems at this moment, APD, those boots on the ground or boots on the train that keep the passengers safe, which is your priority, they didn't receive a dime. Nothing extra. Nothing extra. And you had executives that received bonuses of $200,000 a year, paid primarily by the American taxpayer. Mr. Gardner, I represent the 8th District of Minnesota. The median income there is $55,000. You received a bonus almost 4 times what the hardworking men and women that I represent. And some of that tax money went to your bonus. Do you think that's fair?
So I would say that the representative members of the APD receive a variety of benefits associated with their collective bargaining agreement. So we negotiate that as we do with all of our unions. And in the Amtrak management case, we traded off a pension about 10 years ago almost, and put a less compensation as guaranteed for employees and made it
With just
at
my
risk.
15 seconds left, I'm just concerned that Amtrak is prioritizing growth over customer safety. Those police officers see that you are getting bonuses and the executive board are getting bonuses primarily paid by the American taxpayer, and you can't help those police officers? As a former police officer, I find that extremely offensive, and I yield back.
Mr. Stauber yields. I now recognize Mr. Moulton for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gardner, if the Amtrak police officers want to negotiate for bonuses in their contract, are they allowed to take that into the next collective bargaining negotiations?
Absolutely, Congressman
Great, thank
Moulton.
you very much. I would just like to get back to a conversation that you and I have had about efforts to decrease trip times. We talk a lot about speeds in the railroad industry. We probably don't focus enough on how we just get people faster to where they need to go. You recently raised speeds on the Chicago to St. Louis corridor by 20 miles per hour to 110 miles per hour. Why did it take so long to get to 110 miles per hour?
Well, thank you, Congressman, for the question. And trip time is very important. A key piece of what is attractive about rail is when we can be competitive with driving. This was a program led by the Illinois State DOT together with Union Pacific and funded by the FRA. So Amtrak was a supporter, but it's a state-led project. And it took a long time to rebuild the railway, which is what was essentially necessary, and upgrade the signal system there to handle 110 miles an hour service. It's great that we've achieved it, and it's an important outcome, and it's going to be a big game changer for service in Illinois.
So back in the 1930s, we had a lot of trains in America going 100 miles an hour. This is a 10 mile per hour improvement over what was fairly common in the 1930s. Is there any plans to get Chicago to St. Louis to standard international high-speed standards like 200 miles per hour? In other words, about twice as fast as trains are going on that corridor today?
Well, currently, the plan is 110 miles an hour. To go above 110 miles an hour, you need to have a sealed corridor, a corridor in which all the grade crossings are eliminated, and there would need to be changes probably in the alignment on some of those routes. So those are, in certain corridors, those kind of investments, I think, are appropriate. What I think we've achieved here in Illinois, what Illinois has achieved, is to really achieve the kind of standard level of intercity service we should be aiming for, 110 miles an hour service, which does allow trip time competitiveness. And where there's demand and opportunity, I think pursuing high speed does make sense on top of that base.
I would just point out that regular old commuters just taking trains in and out of London have been going 125 miles per hour for a few decades now, so I just think we could set our sights a bit higher.
Yep.
With regards to trip time, checking the Amtrak website yesterday, it looks like the trip times haven't decreased despite the increase in speed.
Currently, we're in the production season of the major capital work that's occurring on the Northeast Corridor. So we've added some time to certain trains to reflect the fact that they're
Or
likely.
specific to Chicago to St. Louis.
Oh, in the Chicago, St. Louis, sort of the schedule change has not yet taken place. So we're in testing of the new speeds, but the upcoming schedule change will occur here soon. So even though the trains are operating faster, the schedules remain at the current speeds until we've validated everything, and that'll happen soon.
So there are a lot of places on the Northeast Corridor where we also have to straighten curves to improve trip times and speeds. We've talked about this in the past. I sent a letter in August of 2022 on this issue. Have we made any improvements in trip times on the Northeast Corridor?
We have a lot of work underway, Congressman, to do that. These major capital programs that we've discussed are going to be the way that we can change some of the trip time and constraints. For instance, the Baltimore and Potomac Tunnel. As we'll advance that program, we'll take a railroad that today is constrained to 30 miles an hour and make that a 100-mile-an-hour alignment. As you know, a number of bridges also, as we replace them, will give us faster speeds. And as we bundle with those improvements and upgrades to our infrastructure, we're looking to shorten curves to create faster speeds as we also replace the overhead electric lines. So we put the new lines in the right alignment to maximize speed. Our goal is to get 160 miles an hour everywhere the railroad permits it today with the geometry, and upgrade the infrastructure to support that, both signal and power.
Mr. Warren, when do you think we can actually see timetables improve on the Northeast Corridor?
The Connect NEC plan that we are working on updating, we're very focused on improving trip time with projects within the existing right-of-way that you can do while you're doing basic state of good repair and modernization. You can straighten curves, you can replace signal systems.
I just want to know, the next time I go to New York, that's faster than it is today. When is that going to happen?
Unfortunately, it's going to take some time for these, each of these things.
Are we talking about a year, 2 years, 5
seconds
years,
here
a
and
decade?
there. I couldn't give you an exact trip time, but it'll take a number of years for these to start to add up. When you get the 3 minutes from BMP Tunnel, you get 30 seconds here, 30 seconds there. There's also studies that are going to be going on to look at new right-of-way where you can get significant trip time improvements. Those are obviously longer-term projects.
I'm out of time, but I think the American people want to see those returns so we can actually say we invested billions of dollars here and this is what we got. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Moulton yields. I now recognize Mr. Burchett for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. Amtrak was awarded six-figure executive bonuses despite huge losses. You've attempted to take over Union Station's lease at a cost of hundreds of millions of dollars with the speculative benefits returns. You forced unwanted routes onto your national network with questionable customer demands and guaranteed annual losses. What's your all's projected annual operating loss, Mr. Gardner?
For this year, a little bit more than $800 million. That's down significantly from the prior year and the year before.
Yes, sir. According to Amtrak's 5-year plan for fiscal year 2022 through 2027, fiscal years, excuse me, Amtrak expects to lose at least $1 billion per year. Do you think Amtrak will be cutting expenses or increasing ticket prices to address its operating losses?
We've been doing both. Already our 5-year plan has been updated for 23, and you can see we're almost anticipating a little bit more than $800 million. So we've significantly improved those numbers since our 22 5-year plan, and we're doing it on both ends. As you suggest, we've got to maintain and reduce costs where we can. That's difficult in this high inflationary environment. We're about 30% higher in prices than we were in 19. So as we come back to revenues of 19, you can see there's a big gap. At the same time, we are trying to build revenues and are doing quite a good job at that, but we're still just about to get to 2019 revenue levels. It's going to take a combination of both to maintain a improving trajectory. As I said, our hope is on the train operation side of the business to get back to that break-even process. I was at Amtrak, I've been doing Amtrak for 14 years. It took us a lot of work to get to break even in 2020 before the pandemic. I know we can do it again, but it's going to take a while to overcome this big
Well, when you
lag
say
of
break
inflation.
even, though, that's with an addition, that's with the influx of tax dollars, correct?
So, yes.
Yes or no? That's fine.
Yes.
I mean, you don't need to, I appreciate it. I'm going to run out of time. In your written testimony, you stated that y'all expect additional losses the next few years due to the capital-related operating cost projected funds by the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. How much do you expect these capital-related operating costs to be?
Well, several $100 million, because we have to train the workforce and hire the workforce that's necessary to implement this program. There's a whole series of costs that are associated with the capital work that we have to bear as an upfront expense. Particularly all of the training costs we cannot capitalize, and they hit the P&L. So we have to double the amount of workers, for instance, on the Northeast Corridor that are rebuilding track and signals to go from about 4,000 employees to about 8,000 employees. Takes up to 2 years to train those folks. And while we're training them, they are expense, not capital. And so those are the kind of extraordinary costs we have to take for a bit that are in support of the capital work.
It's not in my notes, but memory serves me that there's been several, I guess, exposés or whatever. I don't really like that term because you never know what's behind it. But your commissary continues to lose money. Is that still a problem?
Did you say commissary, sir?
Yes, sir.
So the food and beverage.
I should have said food and beverage.
Yep, no, absolutely. I know what you mean. The food and beverage service is an important part of the Amtrak product. The IIJA required the establishment of a new food and beverage working group, and we just received their report. We owe Congress back our response to the food and beverage report here this fall. In general, the food service is there as a part of the amenities that we offer, so much of the ticket price is covering the costs, and then people also fund through cash purchases depending on which level of service. We're continuing to upgrade quality. We certainly have heard from many members that they want to see better quality, and we've heard that from our customers in terms of the food offerings on board. So we're focused on doing that, but doing that in a way that's fiscally responsible.
I would hope you would be fiscally responsible with that. I mean, at least paying for the food. I think that's just that would be a fiscally responsible move, and I think Congress would probably smile upon that if we were able to smile. I've got no time left. I'm just going to yield. I'll yield to Congressman Cohen, if I could, please.
Just like to ask you a
he's my
question.
spiritual mentor in this committee. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just like to ask you a question. I'm sure you heard about his salary being $500,000. Compared to the TVA chairman's salary, isn't it cheap?
Yes, I would gladly pay our TVA chairman about $500,000 over his
Thank you, sir.
$8 million plus bonus. But I'm not bitter about that, nor are you, Mr. Cohen.
Mr. Burchett yields. I now recognize Ms. Strickland for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Nels and Ranking Member Payne. My home state of Washington has been a longtime supporter and investor in intercity passenger rail. During my time as mayor of Tacoma from 2010 to 2017, I was proud to play an integral role in the development of a new Tacoma station in our region. Because of that experience, I know how critical it is to ensure that local, state, and federal governments all work together to put these critical investments into improving our nation's rail infrastructure, building up our workforce, and I'm pleased to hear about the work that you all are doing at Amtrak. I look forward to strengthening this federal partnership and making sure that when we put these dollars to use in communities, that they are doing exactly what they intended. Mr. Gardner, I know that Ranking Member Larson touched on the strong Pacific Northwest network, and I'd like to start there. As you know, the Washington State Department of Transportation and Amtrak are currently working on the Amtrak Cascade Service Development Plan with improving service over 20 years, and specifically adding two more times that they're going to go between Seattle and Portland. Can you talk more about this timeline and when you think we can expect these two frequencies, that's the word I was looking for, to become available to the public?
Well, thank you for the question, and congratulations on the great station in Tacoma. It's fantastic as part of the bypass. It's a real improvement, and you're right. The Cascades is a great service. We anticipate 2 additional frequencies in October of this year.
Oh, excellent.
Again, the states dictate when we bring service in and how much service we operate and the pricing philosophy, and so we work with our partners in Washington and Oregon on that schedule.
Excellent. And then can you talk about some of the challenges you may face in making this a reality, including equipment shortages, delivery delays, and acquiring the venture cars that you need by California and the Midwest to state support services? You had also stated that adding these 2 new frequencies between Seattle and Portland is going to depend on having enough cars available as those are being phased out. So talk a bit about some of the challenges we face in making this reality with the supply chain.
Well, thank you. And this is a major topic for us. As you, I'm sure, know, the Cascade service retired the Talgo 6 train sets that were in service there, and we've replaced those with a fleet of cars from Amtrak's National Pool, our Horizon and Amfleet equipment. And as you mentioned, the additional cars are necessary for the service, for the additional frequencies are coming from our Midwest pool that are in fact waiting on the delivery of the Siemens Venture cars to the states. So there, the states procured equipment directly with funding from the federal government, and Amtrak is the operator of that equipment, but it's a delivery between Siemens and the states. We were supposed to start this year with 60 new cars as part of this program in service, but in fact those were delayed, and they are still coming into service now. I think we have about 50 in service. Our goal again is to have 60 in service. So we are making good progress, and the manufacturer and the state are working well together to deliver this equipment and get it in service. But that's why we've had a shortage of equipment in the Midwest, and that's cascaded across the rest of the network. So we're anxious to continue those deliveries, get those equipment into service, and then be able to deploy equipment to support the additional frequencies in Washington and Oregon.
Is there anything else that my colleagues and I can do in the Northwest to better support your efforts to expand this service?
Well, as you said, the leadership in Washington and Oregon and the long-term relationship and planning activities really have set the service up for success, because there's a strong vision of the service and how it can progress. Certainly, partnership with the 2 host railroads there, the primary host railroads, Burlington and Santa Fe and Union Pacific, are key, and working with them to get better on-time performance and to continue the opportunities to expand cooperatively with the host railroads is key. I think that's the main challenge in addition to equipment. I will say that our new Aero trains, the first place that they arrive is the Cascade service, so we're excited for those, and Cascades will be really the test bed for our new trains, and it's going to be a great experience, I think.
Great, thank you. And just as editorial here, as we look at passenger rail service with an aging population, fewer people wanting to drive, and a growing population, we know that eventually, these things will become more highly used, more ridership, and therefore more revenue. But it's going to take time, because the United States is not as densely populated as some of the other places where they have more frequent service and more ridership. Thank you very much for being here today.
Ms. Strickland yields. I now recognize Mr. Yakum for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Gardner, I appreciate that you're constantly evaluating new routes and new service options for Amtrak and for your riders, but it's come to my attention that Amtrak is eyeing the use of the South Shore rail line in my district, which runs through North Central and then ultimately over to the west and northwest Indiana. It's a well-established and recently upgraded commuter rail service line that's going through a double-track addition right now over the Michigan City area in order to speed up the rail line service between South Bend and Chicago. One of the things that I'm concerned about is if Amtrak were to assert authority and come in on that line, what I'd like to know from you, and my real question is, would you commit to working with the South Shore to ensure that it would not face any undue scheduling or burden costs should you come in and use that line?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. And you're right, we are looking at a variety of options. No decisions made yet about how we improve our service from Chicago south of the lake. This is vital to our service to Michigan, vital for our long-distance trains, vital for the number of trains that we hope in the future can operate in the Midwest. So the South Shore route is one potential route. As you said, it's recently double-tracked, gone through comprehensive upgrading, and is a great passenger-controlled route. We run into significant problems on the freight lines that are parallel to the South Shore, and it impacts on-time performance for all of these trains. Certainly, we would do so cooperatively with the South Shore. Our conversations with them have always been about looking to see if there's an opportunity for a partnership. The frequency per hour is relatively low. I mean, for instance, we have 24 trains an hour on a two-track railroad in the Northeast. I think there's lots of capacity there, but we'd have to make sure it can be utilized in a way that doesn't take away from the South Shore's business, and I think would be actually a net benefit because you'd have another railroad that could come. We would contribute in as necessary and as we do under our access rights under law, and be able to be a partner for the South Shore and to serve the communities that are today served by the South Shore with intercity service, which today they aren't all.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. And my hope is that it would be collaborative in a way that doesn't negatively affect the times of the South Shore or put any undue cost burden on them. So thank you for that commitment, and I'll be continuing to watch this as we go forward. I want to shift gears and understand how Amtrak makes decisions on new service. You indicated in your opening statement that Amtrak is starting the new Great River Route this year. It's a daily trip between Chicago and St. Paul, Minnesota. Can you tell us how long will it take for that train? What's the total commute time between Chicago and Minneapolis? St. Paul.
If my memory serves me, it's about 6 hours on the current route of the Empire Builder. So this is a service we have today, a long-distance train that goes from Chicago to Seattle and Portland. And what we're able to do with this service, between a partnership between the three states involved here, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois, is take an existing frequency of the Hiawatha service, which goes to Milwaukee, and run that service west across the current route to the Twin Cities. So it adds a second frequency.
On this new service route, I'm showing, my data shows that you're looking at about 7.5 hours of total time between Chicago and St. Paul along that route. I'd like to unpack the financials a little bit. How much federal and taxpayer subsidies do you expect on an annual basis for this route to get it up and running?
Well, the federal taxpayer subsidy will be very limited, as you probably know. These state-supported services, I'd have to get back to you on the specifics for this route, but the states pay the operating subsidy. That's sort of the deal under this state-supported partnership.
Which is still taxpayer money. So the total number here is about $7 million per year to get that route up and running. And so on a 7.5-hour commute, you can drive it in 6 hours. We also checked flights going from Chicago up to Minneapolis, and we just picked a random day, August 8th. We found that there are 18 nonstop flights per day between Chicago and the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and those run from 6 a.m. all the way through 10 p.m. at a cost of, the lowest cost of $84 per ticket on just picking a random day. And so what I'm trying to understand is, how is this a good business and financial decision for Amtrak, given those facts and $7 million a year of taxpayer money?
So again, the primary financial costs are borne by the states, and they elect to do this because they see value. Today, the origin-destination pair between the Twin Cities and Chicago is one of our strongest pairs on the Empire Builder. But of course, since it's a train that comes once a day, there are many travelers who don't find the schedule convenient for the Empire Builder. So this provides a second frequency at a different time of day that allows folks to use the train. We see people elect the train all the time for many reasons. Many are too old to drive, or they dislike driving. Air service, of course, is not always reliable, particularly in bad weather. And this creates redundancy in the modes and gives us more options and more folks a chance to travel. So we anticipate strong demand.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Yakum, thank you. I now recognize Ms. Napolitano for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I have several comments and several questions, so bear with me. I know that I've served in California's Transportation Commission. In my years here, I've never found the rail completely paid for. It's almost always subsidized. Is that true?
Yes.
Well, for how long has Amtrak been requesting funding for state of good repair and infrastructure due to deterioration of the infrastructure and the major backlog projects?
Congresswoman, essentially our entire history has been a source to try and upgrade the old assets that we inherited in 1971.
Well, Mr. Warren, I see in your report that you say there the total cost of the projects including the Federal Railroad Administration's NEC project inventory exceeds $100 billion, with 40 just for major backlog. Is that true?
That's correct. The $40 billion is just for the 15 major backlog projects, bridges and
And
tunnels.
we've only given you 22.
Excuse me?
We've only given the Amtrak 22.
That's correct.
Not quite make sense. I've been on trains in China and France, and they have up-to-date equipment. So somehow we have got to speed up our systems so that we can provide essentially good service, since we have the best nation in the world. Am I correct?
Absolutely. This is the foundation for all the service, is having a modern, reliable infrastructure. And you can't do that with bridges and tunnels that were built when Teddy Roosevelt was president and Ulysses S. Grant was president and William Howard Taft were president.
Very, very good. Now, how are you increasing ridership, Mr. Gardner?
We are working really hard to increase ridership, and we're seeing some great response. In fact, about a third of all of our passengers on Amtrak today are new passengers, riders who have never ridden Amtrak before. There's strong demand for leisure travel in particular. Business travel is down about 30%, with it revenues, but we're able to backfill a lot of that demand by creating a reliable product and really using fare and promotions and price to get new passengers to take a chance on the train.
The question I would have is, how is the cost to travel on Amtrak, and how are you attracting new ridership in California specifically?
So
What
in
advertisement do you
California,
use?
really the state leads the program. The 3 JPAs establish the fare policy and the approach to how we market those services, how they market the services. And I think, as you know, I'm sure, unfortunately, the Los Angeles corridor of the Pacific Surfliner has been very significantly impacted by now 3 different events. A blocking event yesterday has severed the route. So that's been a major impact and really disconnecting San Diego from Los Angeles. But we're working hard with the host railroads who are responsible for maintaining that, to bring the service back. And I think when you do, there's still a lot of frequency in California, and part of this is needs to adjust the service to the new demands in terms of work from home. But we think there's a really strong future.
How about the cost?
Cost as it relates to passengers, the state's policy is to keep the fares very affordable on the state-supported service so that more people can use the train. The philosophy there is.
How many people know that?
Pardon me?
How many people know that?
Well, I think in the state, I think it's a pretty well-known bargain, but I do think that and in fact, you see lots of demand in various corridors, but I think there's even more we can do to get the word out.
Well, also time delay on the affected by railroad preferential treatment not given you, but where does that play in California specifically?
Well, we work closely with our host partners all over America to try and achieve great results for the passenger trains, respecting the freight railroad's duty to serve shippers. And we see some difficulties, though, particularly in California on our route of the Sunset. This is the route going east and then across the southwest, and in our service both from Sacramento north and between the Bay Area and Los Angeles on the coastline. So those are areas where we've had some delays. Some are infrastructure related and some are related to congestion from the freight railroads.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Ms. Napolitano yields. I now recognize Mr. Burleson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gardner, I was an investment advisor prior to joining this circus. But I wanted to ask you, if I were your advisor and I brought forward a business that I wanted to recommend investing in, and that business lost $1 billion every year, since its inception, which you guys are older than I've been alive, has your company ever made a profit in any single year?
No.
Okay, so if I brought that turd of an investment to you, would you consider me a good investment advisor?
Well, Congressman, I think the purpose of Amtrak's creation was not to create a dividend for the Treasury or create sort of an investment vehicle. It was to maintain and enhance passenger rail service as a fundamental piece of the mobility picture in the United States. And so I think Congress has been pretty clear that it's a service that requires investment, just like public transit service everywhere, or rural roads. These are things that need to exist to support commerce, to support our culture, support connectivity.
Right. Okay, I'm going to get back some of my time here. The question I think most Americans ask, and I think people in my district, it's been said before, is that when you have a business that cannot operate and operates at a deficit such as yours, how do you justify giving bonuses in the amount of $200,000 to yourself and other executives?
Well, again, I would say that Amtrak's mission is to connect America. Congress has been quite clear about their expectations about our route service, about all the operations that we make, and we do so trying to balance the need of service and our finances and be good stewards of the taxpayer money. To do that, we have to have an excellent...
Who owns most of the rails that Amtrak uses?
97% of our route miles are owned by another railway. We're a tenant.
So you are a tenant. Do you pay them?
We do.
How much?
Incremental cost by statute. So it depends on the route, but this is set by...
And they're required to have you as a tenant?
Yes, because remember, they had the obligation to run passenger trains by law, and the government relieved them of that obligation and created a federal corporation to take it on.
If I were to ask them if they were here, would you as a client, are you a net loser for them? Are you a liability?
No, we have an incremental cost structure, which means we pay for the incremental costs associated with our use. Our trains are very light. We use very little of the sort of consumables of a railroad. And then we provide incentives for good on-time performance. So some carriers view us as a source of profit and are very focused on getting the incentive pay for good performance.
So one of the questions I have is, we just went through this pandemic, and one of the key issues for my constituents coming up here was do something about the supply chain. Your trains, what's on average, what percentage are they full?
Right now, we have load factors in the high 60s, so it's quite good. So 60%.
60, so about a little over half full.
Yeah, but at peak periods, somewhere in the 90%. So when those segments, again, it's very different than an airline because we're serving many communities.
When my constituents are trying to get goods and services timely into my district, do those freight trains have to give preference to these 50% or 60% occupied passenger trains?
By law, they have to give preference. But I should say that, we run a tri-weekly train across various parts of our network, one train a day, 7 cars, 10 cars. These are not in position to being able to deliver freight service. I'm a former train dispatcher. I certainly know that there's ample capacity and you can run an efficient freight operation with passenger transport.
I just want to press on you the impact that you have on the taxpayers. When I calculate per taxpayer in my district, your impact, just your deficit alone, costs every taxpayer in my district at least $7. Okay, now that may not be a lot of money to you, but to people in back home, they debate whether or not they're going to have Netflix or Amazon Prime or if they're going to pay the cable bill, right? And you're draining from every taxpayer $7 for a service that most of them, the vast majority of them, will never use. And so I'm asking you to reconsider your operation and try to become at least somewhat profitable.
Congressman, I appreciate that. We take very seriously our role and the stewardship of federal funds, where we recognize that all of America pays for this service, as it does a variety of things the federal government invests in. We are looking to achieve, again, break even. We were at break even essentially in 2020. We would have ended with a net surplus had the pandemic not occurred. It's going to take a while to get back there, but we're focused on improving the financials and giving the most value for the federal investment that we get and that Congress sets in terms of our route network.
The gentleman's time's expired. I now recognize Mr. Menendez for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member Payne, my fellow New Jerseyan who cares about rail, is a great advocate as well. And thank you both for coming in. You can imagine serving the 8th Congressional District of New Jersey. This is an important issue for me. I appreciate what you're doing to bring Amtrak, Northeast Corridor, into the 21st century, continuing to find ways to bring Amtrak to new riders, to create greater capacity, ridership, and do things that continue to grow Amtrak. I mean, we've talked about how there's a increased demand for funding, demand outpacing supply. I can tell you that at the consumer level, that's the same case. You know, people want more options for rail, definitely in New Jersey, definitely in the greater tri-state region, and along the entire Northeast Corridor. And I imagine when people have access to Amtrak, to rail, in other parts of the country, that demand's going to quickly increase there as well, in addition to the trends that you're already seeing. So I thank you for that. Mr. Gardner, your testimony describes some of the key projects for which the bipartisan infrastructure law has provided funding. Specifically, your testimony highlights several critical pieces of the Gateway Project in my district, New Jersey's 8th. I want to take a moment to highlight the importance of these projects for my district and the entire region. About how many passenger trips pass through the 10-mile stretch between Newark, New Jersey, and Penn Station in New York City on just on an annual basis?
Congressman, thank you for the question and for your interest in this program. Pre-pandemic is about 200,000 trips a day between New Jersey Transit and Amtrak. The majority of those trips, of course, are New Jersey Transit commuters, and it's a vital lifeline both for the region, but also for our whole system, because this is the linchpin between New York and points north and west, and all of our service to the south and west.
Fully appreciate that. About 200,000, and agree it's the linchpin. How many tracks does this stretch have?
2 tracks, Congressman, and between Newark and the interlocking at Penn Station, which is where it opens up to the station tracks.
Right, and that compares to the rest of the Northeast Corridor how?
Most of the Northeast Corridor is 3 tracks, 4 tracks. Sure. So it's somewhat of a contradiction. It's the place where we have our most number of trains coming together, and in fact, from Newark, proceed from 5 tracks down to 3 and then 2. So we have to funnel 24 trains an hour in each direction across this segment of railroad, and I believe it's the busiest main line in North America by far.
Absolutely, extremely complicated. And what would happen if the Hudson Tunnel closes?
Traffic meltdown. I think there's no doubt that if we were to lose this connection, and when disruptions unfortunately occasionally happen today, you can see this in real life. There's huge impacts across the region because there's insufficient tunnel and bridge capacity, as you know well, to get into New York City and across the Hudson, and many residents and travelers rely on this connection.
And the tunnel was severely impacted by Superstorm Sandy, is that correct?
That's correct. The North River tubes, which is the name of the current Hudson River tunnels built well over 100 years ago now, were impacted in Sandy at about 3 million gallons of brackish water that got into the tunnels, having flooded in from the Hudson River. And they have, while we're able to obviously remove all of the water, they have left a collection of chlorides and salts that are degrading both the concrete and metal elements of the interior of the tunnel.
So the integrity of an old asset was further diminished because of Superstorm Sandy, which gets to my next question. How important is the Gateway project to ensure future viability of the Northeast Corridor?
Well, it's essential to the future of the Northeast Corridor, future of rail transportation for passengers really across the entire East Coast and our connections to the West. So it's essential. And as you said, the core element here is to build a new tunnel which allows us to repair and rehabilitate the existing tunnel and gives us redundancy and resiliency into this vital connection.
That's exactly right. So we would be strengthening, expanding the linchpin to the entire Northeast Corridor, and that's why this project is so important. I appreciate Amtrak's leadership in making sure that we continue to make progress on this vitally important project. That's one of the most important, if not the most important, infrastructure project in the country. I assure you, you have my support, Chairman, Ranking Member Payne's support, the entire delegation's support. We want to get this done and look forward to working with you a long time to support Amtrak. Thank you so much for coming here today.
Mr. Menendez yields. I now recognize Mr. Kane for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to thank the witnesses for being here today. This is a crucial hearing because many of my constituents and all New Jerseyans understand that Amtrak service is critical to our economy and to our livelihood. It plays a critical role in connecting communities and driving economic growth in the Northeast region and beyond. The outline of Connect NEC 2023 in place, my constituents are enthusiastic about the Hunter flyover that constructs a flyover south of Newark Penn Station to eliminate at-grade crossings, to reduce conflicts between trains, and to increase capacity for NJ Transit and Amtrak, enabling NJ Transit to improve the Raritan Valley line service. That is why I introduced the One Seat Ride Act to direct the Secretary of Transportation to conduct a cost-benefit analysis of one-seat ride trip versus a transfer trip option during peak hours on New Jersey Transit's Raritan Valley line. I'm eager to hear from our two witnesses and to gain insight into the challenges and the opportunities facing our passenger rail system. And I will remain ready, willing, and able to make sure that Amtrak is a reliable and efficient mode of transportation for all, and I am supportive of all of your funding requests. Mr. Gardner, it's good to see you again, both at the state level as well as now at the federal level. As you know, the Hunter flyover is extraordinarily important, and there's actually now space reserved for it. Can I again have your commitment in public that that space is reserved for that, the flyover to hit at pace, so we can ensure that the one-seat ride is successful on the Raritan Valley line?
Yes, Congressman, and appreciate your leadership both at the state level in New Jersey and advocating for a strong Northeast Corridor and now here in Congress. We are supportive of this program. New Jersey Transit is taking the lead and working hard to seek funding and advance the program, and we are preserving the right-of-way capability so that the flyover can be built. As you and I have discussed, it does create opportunity for one-seat ride for the Raritan Valley passengers, and it ensures that we deconflict the crossing on the Northeast Corridor so it doesn't interfere with other New Jersey Transit and Amtrak service at that junction.
Thank you. One of the other things that I've talked to you about is both Trenton and Metro Park. While neither are in my district, the fact that I believe right now there is no Acela service into Trenton, New Jersey's state capital, at all, as well as infrequent stops at Metro Park. Can you please talk to me about how we're going to have more opportunities into both Trenton as well as Metro Park for not only access to our state's capital, but also the innovation centers and communities around Metro Park as well?
Yes, Congressman, and you're right that we have reduced some service at Metro Park and Trenton, in part primarily because there has been a reduction in ridership on those stations, post-pandemic, and we're working to rebuild ridership there. We do know we need to add more service there. As you know, we are a little bit down in our Acela capacity with our current train sets, which are quite old, and we're keeping them in service. As we receive our new train sets and are able to expand the fleet of Acela, we'll be able to ramp up service across the corridor and include more service there. We know it's important to Metro Park and Trenton both, and we'll be looking, and I will follow up with you on our schedule for being able to potentially reintroduce service there for Acela. And we continue to have lots of regional service at both stops.
It just seems to me that if people know that there was predictable and efficient service at both those stops more frequently, obviously more people would come and utilize those services to looking as opposed to looking to alternate routes and things that add time and inconvenience to commuters and families and businesses alike. One of the other issues that many people who are commuting north and south, it seems to me for the last 15, 20 years, the cell service always goes out in certain parts of the line. Can you talk to me about how that should seem an easy thing to fix over the course of a line and over the course of over a decade and a half of service there? Can you walk me through why that's not happening?
Sure. Thanks, Congressman. So the cellular service along the route is really the responsibility of the various cell carriers. We have been working with the various carriers to give them the data so that they can see the demand needs across the route. And we have been, we're in active conversations with them. We have had some carriers improve or increase capacity along the route in certain dead spots, and you're right, there are still some remainders out there. We are also partnering to increase capacity in the tunnels from another carrier, but this is an area where we could use support. It's in some countries, it's a requirement that the cellular carriers provide adequate coverage for rail routes. We don't have that here, and we'd like to see.
If I may also, if I may for one quick second, Mr. Chairman, with your support, I also want to emphasize my strong support for the Gateway program. It's the most efficient, effective for New Jersey, New York. It's a time-sensitive and important project. Anything that I can do to ensure that that project is completed on time and with full funding, I'm an ally. Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Mr. Desagne for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both, Chairman and Ranking Member, for this hearing. And to both of you, I just, as someone from a long way away, in a district a long way away from the Northeast Corridor, although I'm a native of Massachusetts, your success is so important for the whole country. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area where I've been involved in transportation for a long time. Sometimes we compete for federal funds with you in California, but we know how important it is that you are successful. So in that context, first I wanted to talk, Mr. Gardner, about this investment's the largest investment since the Eisenhower administration for transportation infrastructure. The Biden administration has been very focused, and I appreciate this as a member of this committee and as a senior member of the Education and Labor Committee, on expanding the middle class. We have the largest disparity between wealth and inequality in the history of this country right now, at least competitive. This investment is the single biggest thing economists tell us we can do to expand the middle class and give opportunity to poor people to move up. So you doing a good job, sorry to put more responsibility on, but given the comments about compensation, is extremely important. You mentioned Siemens in Sacramento. We have some challenges with Siemens in California because they're manufacturing product for the Capital Corridor and Amtrak on the West Coast as well as here. They have a long history of being very successful in procurement, but also an unfortunate history about pushing limits. They were part of the largest settlement with the US and the EU on foreign corruption charges not that long ago. They're aggressive when it comes to the global market. They're being aggressive right now in California about the procurement requirements under the infrastructure bill to make sure that there's a livable wage. I wonder if you could speak to that to make sure that we have people who are going to make money and we value them competing for it, strictly adhere to the requirements in this law, and starting in Sacramento, that middle-class Americans and working Americans benefit from this infrastructure, and we're very careful about adhering to the requirement for a livable wage when they build this product.
Well, thank you, Congressman, for your remarks and for your support. As you say, this is not just an investment in mobility, it's really an investment in a new generation of worker skills and a new workforce. So we're really focused on creating that capacity to serve the needs of the nation and to serve the needs of our network. And as you rightfully say, this is a big increase in available funding for Amtrak and our other partners, state partners, et cetera, and we're all gearing up with greater expertise to be able to manage the dollars well. Part of that is managing our contracts well, being able to oversee those many private sector partners. And to be clear, the vast majority of the dollars here spent are going to go from Amtrak to a private sector partner, to a big construction firm or to a manufacturer who are going to build or deliver great things for us. And so a key aspect of our capacity is creating the expertise, the knowledge to be able to effectively manage our contractors, ensure we get good value out of them. So I can assure you we're working very hard to pass on all the requirements that we receive from the federal funding and the requirements that Amtrak ourselves have, both from policy and in law, and make sure that we get good follow through and compliance from all of our entities. And we'll do that, I can assure you. We're about to go into the market again. Will be the first time we're purchasing since the IIJA has been enacted, for our big fleet of long-distance equipment. This is going to be the largest order of passenger equipment since the 1940s acquisition by the New York Central. So it's a huge opportunity, and we're going to be working really hard to make sure we get good value.
So I'm gonna hold you to that, specifically on the issue in California. We need you to make sure that that investment goes back to the people it was intended to, working Americans, not to companies with questionable track records in terms of ethics, and to their investors offshore. Mr. Warren, just the importance of connectivity. You have a lot of MPOs and other governing agencies. We know in successful countries like Japan, the connectivity between intercity transit and intracity and commuter. Talk to your challenges briefly about working with your partners along the corridor.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. One of the reasons we were created was because of the complexity, the fact that there are so many different owners and operators on the corridor and the intercity and the commuter service. There's a lot of tension, natural tension between priorities that Amtrak might have for intercity service and priorities commuter railroads might have for commuter service. So it's been an important forum to be able to bring people together, to work through those issues, to determine how to share costs. I mean, that we share about $1.3 billion a year in operating and capital costs. And we have a formula that does it, we have a policy that does it, and it saves Amtrak from doing a lot in one-off negotiations with every different railroad, and it makes sure all those railroads are on an equal, fair footing when it comes to paying their shared costs for the use of the corridor. So it's been very valuable, both in getting everybody on the same page when it comes to planning and paying for the corridor, because there's just a lot of natural tension when you have
the gentleman's time
commuter
has
and
expired.
intercity.
I now recognize Mr. Williams for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You may have noticed that we've had a recent discussion about spending in this country. And looking at the numbers, it looks like that Amtrak relies on the credit card of the American taxpayers in order to stay in business. And that seems like increasingly an unviable path. The Amtrak board awarded millions of dollars in performance bonuses to yourselves and others in fiscal year 2021. These bonuses were paid despite Amtrak losing more than $1 billion in fiscal year 2021 and is projected to lose $1 billion a year for the foreseeable future. That's a lot of credit card debt. The head of the transportation workers unions even described these bonuses as an affront to Amtrak workers and further stated that every taxpayer should be livid. And based on the conversation that we had in the House floor last week, I think taxpayers are livid, and the credit card days are coming to an end. You mentioned in your testimony to take seriously the use of public funds and yet you continue to pay out what the New York Post calls a gravy train of performance bonuses. Mr. Gardner, have you ever worked in the private sector?
Yes, sir.
And in what capacity, please? And what time frame?
So as a railroader, I worked in a variety of functions: trackman, brakeman, train dispatcher.
And when was that?
This was in late 90s, and prior to that, I had a number of retail jobs, other things throughout my history.
Well, in the last 25 years, and I suspect before that, there is a strong correlation in the private sector between actual financial performance and bonuses paid to the people responsible for that financial performance. And, I find it unacceptable that your organization is paying out these lavish bonuses, even in the face and to the criticism of your own workforce. Many other members have pointed out that the operating losses, customer satisfaction, overall service is not doing so well. And I live in the Northeast Corridor. I actually like traveling on Amtrak. But I do find that this is unsustainable. Going forward, do you think executives in companies that operate at a severe loss and declining customer satisfaction should or would typically receive bonuses in our economy?
Well, Congressman, so first off, the incentive program, again, encouraged by Congress and all the entities that provided us guidance here, the GAO, the OIG, are triggered two improvements. So we are improving financial performance, we're improving customer service scores, and improving Amtrak controlled delays. That's how we achieve benefits. And in fact, again, our losses are coming down compared to the numbers you quoted. We worked over a decade to achieve a break-even result, something the company had never been able to do for 50 years, but my colleagues worked hard to do this, and we did that in part because we used incentives to align the workforce and achieve improved financial performance, which is what I think companies do all over America, and in fact, sort of our peer group of railroads, absolutely. So I think that it has been working to get better performance. Our customer satisfaction numbers are actually quite good compared to pre-pandemic, and we are achieving better financial results this year than planned, in part because we're using tools to keep us all aligned and to make sure we have the high-quality talent available. Again, professional railroaders, we're a 21,000-mile network, similar size of any of the freight railroads, or several of the freight railroads, and same kind of basic number of employees. We are competing against them for talent. We need to be able to provide reasonable compensation and incentives. We can't give stock options.
Sounds like a really attractive job because, as I understand by your criteria, that so long as you tried, you received your bonuses. And going back to my original question about working in the private sector, talking about 10 years of efforts to achieve break even and mentioning the 50 years of loss before that, I can assure you, as having been in the private sector, that that's not how bonuses are paid. That's not how other workers are measured. And just trying is not enough. The credit card is coming to an end. Thank you for your time. I yield back.
Mr. Williams yields. I now recognize Mr. Carson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I represent Beech Grove, Indiana, which is one of the most important rail maintenance facilities in the country. Now, unfortunately, there have been some efforts to downsize or even outsource the work at Beech Grove, which has caused some concern amongst Hoosiers. I think if we're going to improve our supply chain and rail service, we have to expand opportunities for talented workers and experienced rail maintenance personnel to build up the quality of service and safety. Do you think it's important to strengthen our rail yards and maintenance facilities? If so, what does this look like?
Thank you, Congressman Carson. I know Beech Grove is an important facility to you, and it's, of course, important to Amtrak. It's the vital hub for the maintenance of much of our long-distance fleet and locomotive fleet. So it is a critical location at Amtrak. One of the really great things that's coming as a result of the IIJA investments is that we now have the dollars to invest in state of good repair needs at some of our major facilities. And we're, of course, as I mentioned, doing lots of hiring in the mechanical shop. So building up that workforce in Beech Grove is something we have been doing. There's lots of work underway, and it's a critical facility for Amtrak. Similarly, facilities in other parts of the country are also going to receive investment and are having more workers there because we've got to get all our equipment back in shape and keep it maintained.
Secondly, I'm a big supporter of Amtrak's national network, especially the Cardinal Line, which connects northeastern cities like New York to midwestern cities like Indianapolis and Chicago. And unfortunately, with the loss of the Hoosier State Line, we lost daily service from Indianapolis to Chicago, which was critically important, though slow. These important connections, I think they need to be restored to daily service and made more consistent and reliably on schedule. Mr. Gardner, is Amtrak, under your leadership, sir, committed to strengthening long-distance service on the national network? And are you committed, sir, to improving the Cardinal Line's reliability and restoring daily service from Chi-Town to Naptown?
Well, thank you for the question, Congressman. I actually just rode the Cardinal 3 weeks ago. It was a great trip, and we do believe there is an opportunity for two things. One is potentially providing daily service on the Cardinal between the Northeast via West Virginia and Ohio and Indiana, and also to work with the state on opportunities for corridor service between Indianapolis and Chicago, and there's, of course, service potential to the east, to Cincinnati, et cetera. So those are going to be decisions that are driven by the state. As I've mentioned a couple times today, the growth of this network is going to be a decision that state partners make together with the US DOT and the FRA funding. Similarly, long distance is really a network we operate on your behalf. It's a network that Congress, the administration, essentially set for us in the IIJA. As part of the IIJA, the FRA has been charged with undertaking a study to look at expansions and improvements and restorations to the long-distance network. So this is a great process that the FRA is leading. Amtrak's certainly involved and will be providing information and input. So the work we've applied for funding to look at daily service on the Cardinal and also daily service on the Sunset Limited, which goes between New Orleans via Houston all the way to Los Angeles. And that would allow us to do some preparatory work, and then the FRA will ultimately decide what the future of the long-distance network could be and recommend, I believe, to Congress what those changes would need to be. We really operate that service, again, on your behalf, and so it's the FRA's role to look at those options and then Congress to consider them.
Thank you. I yield back, Chairman.
Gentleman yields, and now recognize Mr. Molinaro for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gardner, could you tell me how much the average Amtrak ticket is subsidized?
Well, it depends on the
how about we use
route, but in, for instance, on the Northeast Corridor, there's about a net operating surplus of about $10 per passenger. On state supported, it's a subsidy of about $16 per passenger, and on long distance, it's about $148 per passenger.
And so I just want to offer in 2019 on a per passenger mile, it's 35.6 cents. 35.6 cents subsidized. I'm not familiar with many of those freight industries, freight rails that are equally subsidized by taxpayers. But Mr. Gardner, I'm going to quote a New York Times article that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit for the record and seek unanimous consent to enter into the record.
No problem. Without objection.
So the New York Times reported in August that Stephen J. Gardner, an Amtrak executive, became the chief executive this year, received more than $766,000 in short-term incentive bonuses from 2016 to 2021, more than any other executive. Eleanor D. Atchison, the company's general counsel, received $727,000 over that period. End of quote. we've been discussing the bonuses received during this hearing. What I'd like to know, because you talked about metrics and incentivizing, what I'd like to know is what metrics you are measured against to consistently receive the bonuses that Amtrak, subsidized by taxpayers, is giving consistent with failure to turn a profit. Where's the New York Times wrong?
Well, first off, just to answer the question of consistency, that the program, of course, isn't consistent. We have not received bonuses many of the years that the program's been available because we failed
Mr.
to.
Gardner, I'm speaking about 2016 to 2021. In 2021, during the height of COVID, when thousands of families were either unemployed or sadly lost lives, like mine, what metric would you use to determine a $200,000 bonus is sufficiently acceptable for an industry subsidized by taxpayers?
In 2020, we suspended our bonus program. Executives like myself took a 22% pay cut for the entire year.
And so your answer is, Mr. Gardner, I have 5 minutes. Your answer is in 2021, since you sacrificed in 2020, 2021, $200,000 is sufficient.
No, the basis for the 2021 award was our financial performance, which beat our anticipated levels by working hard to do that. In
lowest ridership
and
lowest point of Amtrak ridership,
absolutely.
massive folks left on work sitting on the sidelines while many of your employees were working damn hard. I want to turn, because that to me frames my next line of questioning. Okay. In 2022, Amtrak's 2022 ADA progress report, Amtrak has fully managed to address its ADA responsibility at only 90 of the 387 stations where it's responsible for implementation. So as you know, in 1990, the Americans for Disabilities Act was established a 20-year time frame for intercity rail stations to be fully accessible for those with disabilities. Amtrak's appropriated $275 million for accessibility upgrades. And yet, in the Northeast Corridor, I can tell you my own experience in Dutchess County, Rhine Cliff, New York, Amtrak should be ashamed of its lack of ADA compliance. In Hudson, New York, Northeast Corridor, Amtrak should be ashamed of its consistent failure to make ADA compliance. If you think this doesn't frustrate folks like us, it does. What commitment is Amtrak able to make today to fully fulfill the ADA requirement adopted in 1990, knowing that at the very least in the Northeast Corridor, in my part of the country, we have for now 2 generations been left with individuals in wheelchairs trying to find their way over active tracks?
Congressman, I share your passion for compliance of the ADA.
But not the outcomes, Mr. Gardner.
We have been working hard, and we have achieved significantly more progress than you've noted. So there are 110 fully compliant stations and 69 additional compliant stations, with the exception of platform work. Much of the work that has been done to date was retarded by a lack of funding. That is now solved with the IIJA, which provides $1.2 billion for us to bring all of the facilities that we are responsible for, the roughly 380 you mentioned, into compliance. We will do that. The last project will be in 2028. We're working hard to achieve really good results. We'll have 39 additional projects completed by the end of this fiscal year. So we are on path to address this. One of the main issues is also the various ownership of these stations. We own a very small percentage of the stations, and we have to get.
Mr. Gardner, I appreciate my time is up, Mr. Chairman. I just would say I was quoting from your IG report, and it would be I would like to see the same kind of commitment to achieve the ADA compliance as you suggest.
Mr. Molinaro yields. I now recognize Mr. Cohen for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Gardner, I'm a big supporter, as you know, of Amtrak and passenger rail service throughout this country. And of course, I also have an interest in my area, Memphis, which has New Orleans, Chicago, city of New Orleans, but also wants to expand to Little Rock and or Nashville. Can you give me an assessment of where those possible expansions of service out of Memphis stand at the present time?
Thank you, Congressman, and thanks for your support and leadership on passenger rail issues. I know that the state has submitted a corridor identification application to the Federal Air Administration for service from Memphis east to Nashville, on to Chattanooga, and to Atlanta. So that's a very interesting corridor, one that holds a lot of promise. And the process now will be for the FRA to consider those applications for the corridor development program and to make their selections, and then that will provide some initial seed funding to be able to begin the planning work. So that's a great step and one that we've supported.
Could the state do more, or is the state doing what's necessary?
I think this is the first critical step, is to get in the program, to make this submission and to express their interest. And once the FRA has made their decisions, then there'll be a process to further study and work, of course, with host railroads and work with operators like ourselves to plan out a service. But this was a critical step that was necessary by the state.
That route could be, I think, very important, because Ford's opening a major plant about 40 to 50 miles out of Memphis. So rail getting people to and from that facility, and also further into Middle Tennessee would be important. But the Memphis to Nashville area is not served by air transportation, commercial air. There would be, and I have heard, a great amount of support in Memphis and Nashville. People in Memphis want to go to Nashville, the state capital, for all kind of reasons. And people in Nashville have even more reasons to leave and come to Memphis. So there's this great synergy of energy there that would be important. So I urge you to look at that carefully. Also, Little Rock, we've had, is governor of Arkansas, or the state of Arkansas, done anything to get that Memphis to Little Rock route that would go on to Dallas?
Well, I think there are a lot of opportunities. I just was on the city of New Orleans several months ago and had a chance to see the great station in Memphis and the development happening there. And in the basically late at night, the amount of demand there is similar in Little Rock. I was recently on the Texas Eagle at 3:15 a.m. and 30 or 40 passengers lining up to take the train. So if we could serve those markets during the day with reliable service to connect these city pairs, we think there's a real opportunity for rail to play a bigger role.
Is Arkansas doing anything to help that? Because the state's real involved. Is it not necessary?
Yep. So I think I'm not sure that that corridor has been submitted for the corridor ID program, but the good news is that that's a rolling process, so there'll be more opportunities for states to put forward other opportunities and interests.
I presume you heard about it. The Gannett newspapers ran a section on summer travel this past weekend in Memphis, at least, and one of the highlights was rail. It said rail was a great way to go, and it talked about all the routes, but there were two criticisms. One was you always have to wait, just get used to it. The other was dining. I've been concerned about the dining experience, which I experienced as a child and think is part of the romance of a train travel. What is going to be done with the Amtrak Food and Beverage Working Group report on improving dining, making it more available, and which enhances the consumers' enjoyment of the Amtrak experience?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So we've worked hard to restore traditional dining and had great results as a result of that on our Western trains. We're bringing traditional dining back to our Silver service in the East, and we are looking at as I mentioned, we just got the food and beverage recommendations here recently. We're working on going through those. Amtrak was a part of that, but it's a big group of folks from the culinary world, from our riders, from our labor partners coming together to give us great recommendations about how to improve the service. So we'll be back to Congress with our take on that report and the different efforts that are underway, but we're committed to improving the experience and also making, as we have done in certain instances, making the dining car available to coach passengers where we have capacity.
Thank you. I look forward to traveling on one of those longer trains between Chicago and Los Angeles or Frisco. They certainly give you the opportunity to see the country and enjoy it. And last question, and I don't want to harp on this at all, but did Richard Anderson start the bonus program, or was it before him?
Say it again, please.
Richard Anderson, did he start the idea of the bonuses at Amtrak, or did it pre?
No, it began actually under CEO Joe Boardman, and again, it was a response to the PRIA, Passenger Rail Investment Improvement Act of 2008, which encouraged that Amtrak adopt a program that was performance-based, because based on the kind of long history of Amtrak, a lot of the compensation was deferred compensation in the form of pension. This took away that and actually saved taxpayers hundreds of millions, $1 billion of future exposure, and traded that for performance-based compensation so that Amtrak's employees would be tied to the goals and metrics that we set. And that, as I mentioned, has not been something that simply is awarded. It's earned, and oftentimes the company has not achieved its goals.
Thank you very much. I yield back the balance of my time, and I look forward to my ham and eggs in Carolina.
Mr. Cohen yields. I now recognize Mr. Lamalfa for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gardner, first, I want to harken back a little bit to when we were talking about the bonuses, and I'll leave it be, but it's just not a good look when things are going so badly for the country during the COVID era, that even though maybe the expectations of the rail were a little better than lowball, hopes that shouldn't kick in big bonuses like that. It's about as popular as Congress getting pay raises or something like that. So, that all said, you had when there are stats here. It says that ridership has returned to pre-COVID levels, but how can that be when ridership in fiscal year 2022 was seen as about 85% overall in the final 6 months, and overall for the year was 68%. How do we say that we're at pre-COVID levels when you can really say it's 2/3 of that?
Congressman, thanks for the question. So as of April, we were at 89% of our pre-pandemic demand, and that's essentially on roughly 85% of our capacity. So we don't have as many trains in the marketplace, and we don't have as long a consist. So we actually have sort of more demand against the available capacity than we did in pre-pandemic. We're working hard to restore that capacity. We'll have essentially be back to capacity levels in '24. That's why we're confident we can reach the 32 million riders we had prior then.
A number like 100% in '24.
Yeah, we anticipate to be back in '24. We are about 28.5 million is our expectation for '23, and we have 32 million for '24.
Got to keep moving, sorry. Okay, has that been evenly distributed along the long-distance routes or state routes or the Northwest Corridor, or they have different performances?
Different performance. So we've had some routes that have actually exceeded their pre-pandemic levels, some routes that are less. I would say that the routes that are having the less ridership are those routes that are more subject to the impact of work from home, and we're more subject to daily commute.
So
most
Amtrak
trips are not, excuse me?
Probably the most important one, I guess, would be the Northeast Corridor. What's its number?
Northeast Corridor is doing well. We're basically back to, when I looked at last week of April, we were at 1% below riders for that same week in 2019. So there's plenty of demand on the Northeast Corridor. And our long distance trains, there's a really strong demand in a number of them, particularly for our sleeping class product.
Okay. Sorry, I have 3 committees at the same time, so I haven't had the benefit of hearing the whole committee today. I have a reference here to what was known as the train ride from hell in January this year from Virginia to Florida. A normally 17-hour ride from Virginia to Florida added an additional 20 hours. I guess there was a derailment. I understand, that's a problem, big time. But several delays made it a really terrible ride for the passengers. So the problem I have with it is that people are not allowed to have the options to get off the train and move around, or maybe just jump off if someone comes to pick them up or they get an alternate. Of course, they seem to run out of food during the time on the train. So, and then just a lack of knowledge of what's going on, so people can maybe exercise options. So, what's being done? You hear that with airlines sometimes too, with leaving the gate. So what's being done to give passengers a little more, respect or options on letting them get off the darn train if they need to, just to stretch, Is there ability to be able to reverse to the previous most train station or an appropriate area, even a good crossing? People could get off and what do you think about that?
So you're right that this was a very difficult trip. We certainly apologize to and refunded all our customers. This was driven by a grade crossing accident on CSX between a CSX freight train and a vehicle that essentially blocked the route. And our train, this is a special train. This was the auto train. So this is a train where we have a number of cars that are carrying passengers and then a number of auto racks that are carrying their vehicles. So it's a very unusual train. We had already departed the terminal, and because of the configuration and length of this train, it was not possible to reverse it or to turn it anywhere en route. CSX gave us the information, I think the best information they had at the time, which was to reroute this train, but it turned out that routing took much, much longer than CSX had expected, and they were required to produce additional crew to help us navigate the portion of the route we don't normally use. Our goal is to let folks get off the station, get off at stations, of course, and to always, if we have a problem, to come to a stop at a station, and to let folks go. In this case, the problem was separating people from their cars.
Yeah.
Because if we got them off, they couldn't get their cars because the cars would still be stuck, and we had to get them to the final station. So it was difficult. We did provide food and water throughout the trip. There were times later when passengers could get off, but it was in the middle of the night. So it was an unfortunate experience. We're spending a lot of time and effort increasing our communications.
Indeed, a very tough deal. I get you on that. But I guess with an eye to the future, you got to give people opportunities to, in other situations. I mean, I was even involved in one. We went on a trip there, and you got to give people options to be able to at least get out, move around, and get better service that way. So my time flew by. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Malhotra yields. I now recognize Mr. Carter for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, thank you very much. Mr. Gardner, for the people of Louisiana who have been very patient in waiting for rail between New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Mobile, here's your shot. Give them the shot of the arm of confidence that this is actually going to happen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Carter, and we are very confident about bringing service to the Gulf Coast, and we have reached a settlement with our partners, and our hope is that could commence by the end of the year. We'll see. It could be pushed on a little longer. It's going to be depending on some construction work that's happening in Mobile, the station there, some other things, but we're working hard. There's strong support from the states and the Southern Rail Commission, as you know, and we're really just at this point got to get all the elements in place. But Amtrak is committed, has been long committed to this service and to be a partner to the Southern Rail Commission. As it relates to Baton Rouge, we supported certainly the Louisiana and Southern Rail Commission efforts there, and have a strong partnership with Canadian Pacific, now KC, to permit us to operate trains over that route. There's going to be some investment required, particularly to deal with the spillway there, to be able to facilitate the service. But a good plan. Both ourselves and CP are soon to be in receipt of the preliminary engineering work sort of report that's necessary for us to look at those opportunities. But we see that service there could happen in several years, and on Mobile to New Orleans, that should be really within the year.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I know how hard you guys worked on it, but I want to emphasize the importance it is for the people of New Orleans, for the region, and it's something that has been long awaited, and we're very excited about the movement. In the Gulf Coast Working Group of 2017 report to Congress, they wrote, in the more than 10 years since Hurricane Katrina struck, Gulf Coast leaders and residents have made great strides in rebuilding businesses, communities, and infrastructure that connects cities across the region. In the last 5 years, more than $3 billion in private funds were invested in industrial, medical, IT, and aerospace sectors. As mentioned earlier in this report, during the next 30 years, the Gulf Coast and Florida populations are expected to increase by 10 million to 13.8 million, respectively. For the region to harness this projected population growth, it needs multimodal transportation systems that provide transportation as alternatives. Do you believe that this route serves as the multimodal transportation system that was called for 5 years ago?
I think it's the beginning of that service, absolutely. There's going to be the initial corridor service, and then certainly opportunities to strengthen connectivity between the intercity passenger rail service and local transit, because as the report says, it's really critical that we create a network of operations that can support people traveling without their cars. We think this initial service is a great start. We're excited for it, and I think there's a lot of support amongst
Do you see this for being useful for commuters as well as vacationers?
Absolutely. We see there's a strong international visitor component in New Orleans that will find rail service, I think, attractive. And then we see a lot of opportunity along the Gulf Coast there for many of the towns that have things to offer visitors and for workers and who need to travel between the various cities for jobs.
And we find ourselves now in hurricane season. Share with me your view on it being able to be utilized as a mode of transportation for disasters and evacuations.
Well, we've had some experience with this in the past, and I think that the difficulty typically with using passenger trains for evacuation, unless it's well in advance, is that our host railroads, the freight railroads, often curtail their own operations in advance of a hurricane. So if they've shut down the railroad, we can't operate over it. Having said that, certainly we endeavor to work with FEMA and work with the state emergency management folks about creating opportunities for service when there is a need. But it's difficult where we don't control the railroad.
Okay, you got a few seconds left. I want to go back to these Chrissy grants that were mentioned earlier. Chrissy grants, share with us and the public benefit of your having access to Chrissy grants.
Well, Chrissy really is a unique program in that it's available to a broad set of eligible participants to cover a variety of rail improvements. Most of the Chrissy grants we've ever been involved with are at the request of states or railroads who seek to gain safety investments or other improvements in their properties that'll
Go back
facilitate
for a
passenger
second.
rail.
Safety.
Absolutely.
Safety. One of the most significant things that we can do with transportation going through communities is making sure the communities are safe. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Mann for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Nels. I represent the big first district of Kansas, which is 60 primarily rural counties in western, central, and a few in the eastern part of the state of Kansas. Transportation infrastructure is very, very important to us. The Southwest Chief route runs through the state of Kansas, where 53% of residents live within 25 miles of a passenger rail station and 75% within 50 miles. Kansas is also home at the same time to 4,600 miles of active rail, which Amtrak utilizes for its passenger rail service. Mr. Gardner, the Southwest Chief route runs right through my district and makes several stops each night and early morning. I'm just wanting to confirm that you, as the CEO and Amtrak, are supportive of long-distance passenger rail routes like Southwest Chief.
Yes, sir, we are. We're supportive of the chief, and we are looking to hopefully connect the chief with the leadership of the two states of Oklahoma and Kansas, potentially to the Heartland Flyer in Newton.
I appreciate that. I've heard that Amtrak has planned on reducing the sleeper car capacity of the Southwest Chief route. This seems a little contradictory, seeing that I know you're supportive. Is this true, and can you provide an explanation?
No, I'll get back to you on the specific details, but our goal here is to, in fact, put as much sleeper capacity as we can on routes with strong demand. The western routes have particularly strong demand. The issue has been we've been working through some of the overhauls that are in come due and need to get done by our mechanical shops, and the impacts of a number of equipment pieces that we've lost in recent incidents. So we have a smaller fleet today because we have roughly 30 or so wrecked vehicles that can't be repaired, and we're working hard to get more capacity back out into all of our long distance routes because we see success occurring on routes like the Chief.
Okay, thank you. And as you know, next question, our country's faced significant supply chain issues over the past few years. The freight rail and short line rail have been some of the major industries that have been affected. The railroad, of course, owns the track that Amtrak uses. And what assurances can you give our nation's freight and short line railroads as Amtrak looks to expand that Amtrak will be a good negotiating partner in the development of future passenger rail service?
Well, it's absolutely required that we be a good partner. We try and find productive, mutually beneficial outcomes to both support the service we have today and achieve the kind of results that I think you expect in terms of on-time performance, and to permit growth where it is appropriate. And that, again, is a calculus that is developed by us, our state partners, the FRA, et cetera. But then we seek to negotiate and come up with a collaborative solution. And generally, we've been supportive of that. I would point to our agreements with Canadian Pacific as a great example of two railroads working together. We've got a great relationship there. And that's going to be always our goal, is to find a mutually beneficial solution, but also one that respects the rights that the public was given and that Amtrak was given through its creation to utilize the nation's rail system. But we don't do that in a way, we don't believe that significantly negatively impacts freight railroads. And there is a safeguard method, essentially, that ensures that that our additional service does not come at the expense of the ability to move goods and services in the United States.
I think that's incredibly important. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Stanton for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to join the subcommittee for today's hearing on a topic of great interest to the people of my state in Arizona. I wanted to be here because Phoenix is the largest city in the United States without access to passenger rail service. As other communities have gained access to passenger rail, they've experienced significant new economic opportunities, but Arizona thus far has missed out. I'm hopeful that will change, and there is reason for optimism. Amtrak has applied for funds under the bipartisan infrastructure law to restore long-distance train service to Phoenix via the Sunset Limited, and Arizona has submitted a proposal to the Federal Railroad Administration's Corridor ID program to advance frequent and reliable passenger rail service between our two large and fast-growing metropolitan areas, Phoenix and Tucson. Arizonans have wanted passenger train service between Phoenix and Tucson for decades. So it is no surprise that this effort has significant local and state support. The mayors of Phoenix and Tucson and other communities along the proposed lines are on board, and the state of Arizona is behind it and has provided $3.5 million in state funds for the planning effort. What does this all mean for Arizona? It means opportunity. Opportunity to connect our communities, make them more accessible and productive and more internationally competitive. Opportunity to boost our regional economies with better access to jobs and more private investment along the route. Opportunity to ease congestion along Interstate 10 to help reduce air pollution. Mr. Gardner, if Amtrak is successful in its application for federal funds through the bipartisan infrastructure law to restore long-distance train service to Phoenix, how specifically will these resources be invested, and how will these investments help advance and accelerate the development of the Tucson, Phoenix, West Valley intercity passenger rail line?
Well, thank you very much for the question, and I just had the pleasure of seeing the mayor of Phoenix and the mayor of Mesa recently and heard their strong interest and support in this. And as you said, it's really a pretty remarkable corridor, very, very strong local support, bipartisan support for bringing service back there. As we mentioned, Arizona DOT will be the lead. They've submitted corridor identification applications to consider service between Phoenix and Tucson. And what we're also trying to start is the work to connect Phoenix to the west back to the UP main line, the Southern Pacific Sunset route. That portion of the route was severed today. Our service, the Sunset Limited, goes to Maricopa, about 40 miles or so, I think, south of Phoenix. So it really misses the mark. And as you said, Phoenix's growth has been huge, and it's really frankly an embarrassment that we don't serve such a major and prominent city. And I would say that about many other cities, Nashville included, Columbus, et cetera, cities that are obviously of the right size. So we think the market in Arizona is great for interstate passenger rail, and we'll are partnering with the state to support that, and we are looking to undertake potentially that initial work to understand what it will take to restore the service back from Phoenix West and route our long-distance train that way.
I appreciate it. It's time. You said the word embarrassment. I mean, Phoenix is the 5th most populous city in the United States of America, and it does not have access to intercity rail service. I talked a little bit about the opportunities that will come with new passenger rail between Tucson and Phoenix. Could you talk about some of the benefits Amtrak has seen in other communities that get new intercity rail service and what ridership has looked like?
Well, we're really excited for this new service, of course, in the Gulf Coast coming. I would say that in general, we see very strong adoption when we introduce new service. Everywhere I go across America, communities small and big, the common refrain I get is, how come we don't have more trains? How come we don't have faster trains? How come I don't have more service in my community? I've really, literally never met anyone who wasn't interested in more trains to their locations. And when we see new service introduced, we get really an initial period, of course, of introduction, but we've seen very strong results. We just extended, for instance, the service to Burlington, Vermont, up from Rutland, which has been a long time coming, and we've already exceeded our expectations there in terms of the ramp up of the service. We anticipate again, where we can produce a reliable, frequent, and competitive option, that passengers will come, and that the state will see real value for its investment. I think this is clear because states continue to maintain this service year after year after year. Once it's installed, it becomes an integral part of the community, and they elect to continue those investments to preserve the service.
Thank you very much. My time is up. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman yields, and gentlemen, I appreciate your very engaging and sharing your thoughts and your insight into Amtrak. We have a couple of members that would like to go into a second round of questioning. So I would like to yield 5 more minutes to Mr. LaMalfa.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the second round here. Mr. Warren, I wanted to ask you about on your northeast corridor there. Do you find at this point that your passengers are utilizing all or most of the tickets for either the conventional or the Acela high-speed line? How's that performing?
I'm sorry, passengers are utilizing the Amtrak regional and Amtrak.
How are ticket sales for the high-speed line, basically? Yeah. Are they selling out?
Acela's struggled some because they've had a shortage of trains and have just been replacing them. The regional trains have been doing very well on the corridor. The leisure travel.
Are the high-speed Acela trains selling out?
I might turn to Stephen for that. I know the trains I've taken have been very busy, partly because there's been fewer of them, but they've also been getting more leisure travelers on the Acela trains to make up for some of the loss of business travelers. So overall, the ridership, as Stephen mentioned before, on the corridor is very strong, particularly Amtrak. The commuter railroads.
I'm trying to parallel this with the prospects of a high-speed rail in California. Of course, it's going to be 4 times more the cost that was sold to the voters back 10, 12 years ago, whatever it was. And so I want to see the performance of on a dense route, like. So I'll ask it again. Do you believe Acela, the high-speed trains in of themselves, are they performing well on tickets, on sales, or are they half full? How's it look?
Yeah, well, before COVID, they were making a significant profit, an operating profit. That was largely driven by the Acela trains and the sales made for tickets on the Acela trains. Mm-hmm. I believe the profits were in the neighborhood of $300-400 million a year on the operating side on the Northeast Corridor pre-COVID. Obviously, since COVID, they've been down, but the Acela trains have been very successful and have driven significant operating profits on the corridor.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gardner, what do you anticipate the Amtrak's relationship will be with California with the high-speed rail line, whatever portion that may be completed of that? Right now, it's going to start in an almond orchard and somewhere around Bakersfield and be completed somewhere around Madera is just the first segment. There's going to be 2 more giant segments needed after that. What do you think Amtrak's role will be with whatever that's going to be?
Well, Congressman, thanks for the question. I think that, first off, the state and the authority and our partners, JPAs, will decide exactly how the service is going to progress. My understanding is that there will be a connection between the San Joaquin service to the new high-speed service, and we'll see if Amtrak is the operator there. I mean, we are really the partner, we're the provider of service, so it's really the state and the authorities that are going to decide how the service operates. But we will connect wherever we can with our long-distance service, of course, to create opportunities for riders to connect to the service.
Yeah, okay, thank you. When we're talking in general about expansion of service or lines, or, you know, are we talking building new tracks somewhere for Amtrak?
Most often not. So most of the expansion opportunities that we see and that many folks have applied for through this corridor development program are to take existing railway lines and upgrade them in some instances, or use them if they're already at the right class of track.
And for the most part, so there might be areas where you're adding more parallel track or even making brand new, breaking ground on new routes.
There will be instances where additional track is necessary, often within an existing right-of-way, because many right-of-ways used to have more track than they do today, and we're downsized by the freight railroads. So, but in some cases, there may be a need for some additional track or new routes, but much of the proposed expansion of service is on existing rail lines.
Okay, how do you expect that, I'm not trying to be a mean guy here on this. I like passenger rail, and I enjoy it on the times we get to run up and down the corridor here and such, but, you know, it's got to be in the ballpark of at least breaking even or profitable. So how does adding more to a situation that is not profitable or break even going to help the bottom line to not take that even in a deeper spiral?
Well, Congressman, I would say that most of the really all of the states who decide to get into this business of supporting passenger rail do so for broader mobility goals, the same way that public transit operates, right? Public transit is not profitable. It comes with significant investments that are required, but it creates value by providing mobility that then enables more economic activity, enables development in cities and towns. So I think that's the rationale on which folks invest in passenger rail, because transportation in and of itself is often unprofitable. If you add all the costs of the aviation system to what the carriers pay, you don't, I think, in a way, see a net profit. Similarly, on the highway system, it's a means to create value in these transportation systems. And so states elect to start new service or fund the service they have because they get value for their citizens in doing so.
I get you. I'm going to have to yield the time here, so thank you. But
Thank
it
you.
sounds like the bottom line is that indeed it will add more negative costs that federal government will have to cover if since there doesn't seem to be the ability to have profit. So thank you again for your indulgence, Mr.
Mr. Malonfa, yes, Lamalfa yields. I now recognize Ranking Member Payne for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we've heard a lot about Amtrak not turning a profit today. Last month, we heard from the very profitable freight railroads and from their customers about their ongoing supply chain challenges and how the freight rail customers are still not getting adequate service. Mr. Gardner, what would happen to Amtrak service if you adopted a single-minded focus on profitability?
Congressman, I think essentially none of the national network trains that are long distance would still be in operation. They all require significant investments. And the state-supported routes are by and large funded by the states. There's a little bit of federal investment there, and under the new policy we developed, Amtrak is providing some of the core security and insurance costs. But those routes would be at risk if the states elected not to continue to fund them. The Northeast Corridor, to just go to the earlier conversation, pre-pandemic was creating about $500 or $550 million in net operating surplus, but of course that relies on a very significant investment in capital to bring the assets up to a state of good repair. So federal funding is required for this network. It always has been, it likely always will be. Our goal is to try and get as much value for the American taxpayer out of that and run the network that you all as our owners tell us that you want for the nation. This is similar for every passenger rail operator around the world. And we take our stewardship responsibility seriously, and we're trying to always balance that connection between sort of quality of service and level of service with expense. And of course, we still have to live every year with the dollars that are provided to us in the annual appropriations.
So the railroad entities around the world have the same challenges as Amtrak does?
They do, except they receive significantly more funding typically than Amtrak does.
Thank you.
Yep.
That's what I wanted to hear. Mr. Warren, how would passengers along the Northeast Corridor react to these changes to services?
Turn your mic.
The improvements that are going to be funded through the infrastructure bill are going to have significant benefits to service. Going to have more reliable service, more frequent service, and faster service. So we're expecting to attract significant new passengers over the course of the 15 years of this plan as we're able to improve the service and build new capacity. In the NEC 2035 plan, we estimated about 60 million new riders over 15 years. So our expectation is, as you know, the ridership in the Northeast Corridor is already strong, and it's just going to get stronger as we can improve the reliability of the trains and the frequency.
Thank you. Mr. Gardner, now that the funding is at least taken care of for the immediate future, what are some of the major obstacles to enhancing and developing rail service?
Thank you, Representative Payne. There are, on the Northeast Corridor and broadly, several challenges. First, of course, is workforce. We've talked about the need to ramp up the workforce and train the workforce. That's a big challenge. We're working hard on that. Two, the supply chain is a challenge, finding adequate vendors and suppliers with a domestic supply chain. Because, of course, Amtrak, 97% of our purchases are with firms here in the United States, and getting the robust supply we need for not only things like rolling stock, but just simple amounts of concrete, steel, copper, et cetera, to build all these new big programs is going to be a challenge, and dealing with inflationary costs there. The coordination amongst the operators, and let me just sort of thank Mitch Warren here, who has been an incredible leader of the commission, came to the commission really in its inception and works hard to bring all of the entities together to come up with a common plan. We have a common plan, but it's not easy to execute. We have 12 different railway operators, over 4 owners in the Northeast Corridor, and trying to get coordinated and balanced construction work against service is a real challenge. In order to rebuild the railroad, we have to take it out of service, similar to on interstate highways. You know, we all hate it in the summer. They close down a bunch of lanes to do work. We all sit in traffic. That kind of problem faces us on the corridor as well, because we've got to rebuild the railroad while it's still under load and balance the different needs of operations against construction. And then finally, the partnerships for funding are required. Amtrak is an investor of much of the Northeast Corridor projects, but certainly not the only investor. And in something like the Gateway, we're the minority investor. We need the states to come up with their local matches and their transit partners to have the dollars they need to be able to partner with us on these shared benefit projects.
Thank you. And, I appreciate both of you gentlemen staying here. And, well, Chairman, as I look both sides of the aisle, it looks like it's just you and me.
I guess so.
With that, I'll yield back.
Thank you. Ranking Member yields. Are there any further questions from any other members on the subcommittee? I see none. This concludes our hearing today, and I'd like to thank each of our witnesses for their testimony. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. The subcommittee stands adjourned.